On Christmas Eve, my son blocked the door and said, "You are not our family anymore. Go away." I saw his wife laughing behind his back, holding a glass of vintage wine that I paid for. I just nodded and got in my rusted truck and made one single phone call. 5 minutes later, the lights in the mansion went dark. The music stopped, and all the guests got up from the table and left, leaving my son with a bill he could not pay and a reputation he could never repair. Before I continue this story of justice, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who mistook your kindness for weakness. My name is Conrad King. I am 72 years old, and standing on the porch of the estate I built brick by brick felt like standing on the edge of a foreign country. The Seattle snow was falling heavy and thick, coating the shoulders of my worn-out wool coat. In my trembling hands, I held a cardboard box wrapped in cheap red paper. Inside was a doll for my granddaughter Mia, the only pure thing left in this family. It was not an expensive gift. It was not the latest gadget. It was a simple rag doll I had found at a thrift store, but I knew Mia would love it because I had fixed the loose button eye myself. I knocked on the heavy oak door, the sound muffled by the festive jazz music playing inside. Through the frosted glass, I could see the golden glow of the chandeliers, the silhouette of servers moving with trays of champagne, and the laughter of the city elite. I used to be one of them. I used to be the man they toasted. Now I was just the old man they hoped would die quietly so they could divide the spoils. The door swung open. The warmth from the foyer hit my face, smelling of pine needles and expensive roast beef. My son Bradley stood there. He looked impeccable in a tuxedo that cost more than my truck. He did not smile. His eyes scanned my scuffed boots, my faded coat, and the cheap box in my hands with a look of pure disgust. "What are you doing here, Conrad?" he asked, his voice low and cold. "I just wanted to see Mia," I said, my voice raspy from the cold air. "I brought her a Christmas present." Bradley stepped forward, blocking my view of the party. "We have guests, Dad. Important guests. Investors. People who matter. You look like a hobo. You are embarrassing me." From behind him appeared Monica, my daughter-in-law. She was wearing a red silk dress and holding a crystal glass of wine. She looked at me with a sneer that twisted her beautiful face into something ugly. "Oh God, Bradley! Get him out of here," she hissed. "He is going to get snow and mud on the Persian rug. Look at him. He is filthy." "I am your father," I said, looking Bradley in the eye. "I paid for this house. I paid for that suit. You paid for nothing," Bradley spat. "You are a washed-up old man living on a pension. We don't need you here. We don't want you here. Go back to your trailer or wherever you crawl into at night." I tried to step past him just to leave the box on the table, but Bradley shoved me. It was not a gentle push. It was a violent shove with both hands. I lost my footing on the icy steps. I flailed my arms trying to catch the railing, but I missed. I fell backward, landing hard in the snowbank, the cold wetness seeping instantly through my clothes. The box flew from my hands and landed in a puddle, the red paper soaking up the dirty water. "Stay away, old man," Monica laughed, sipping her wine as she looked down at me. "You are not part of this family anymore. Security will escort you if you come back." The heavy door slammed shut. The lock clicked. I lay there in the snow, staring up at the gray sky, while the sound of laughter resumed inside the warm house. My hip throbbed, but the pain in my chest was far worse. They thought I was weak. They thought I was broken. They had no idea that the man lying in the snow was not a victim. He was a sleeping lion who had just been woken up, and he was hungry. I slowly pushed myself up from the frozen ground, brushing the wet snow from my knees. My hip joint popped, a sharp reminder of my age and the gravity of the fall, but I did not cry. Tears are for the helpless, and tonight I was anything but helpless. I walked to my truck, a battered 1998 Ford F-150 that sat in the shadow of the manicured hedges like an ugly scar. To Bradley and Monica, this truck was proof of my failure. To me, it was the best disguise I had ever bought. I climbed into the cab, the air inside smelling of stale coffee and old leather. I did not start the engine immediately. Instead, I reached under the passenger seat and pulled out a small hard plastic case. Inside was not the cheap flip phone I used to call my son. It was a satellite phone encrypted and direct linked to a secure server in Zurich. I dialed a number I had not used in 5 years. It rang once. Mr. King, the voice on the other end, was sharp, crisp, and alert. It was Whitman. He was the only man in the world who knew exactly how much I was worth, and he had been waiting for this call. "Do it," I said. My voice was steady, devoid of the tremulous old man act I had played for so long. "Are we initiating the containment measures?" Whitman asked. "No," I said, staring through the windshield at the golden glow of the mansion windows where my family was drinking my wine and spending my money. "We are past containment. Execute Protocol 0. There was a brief pause on the line, a silence that carried the weight of a guillotine blade hanging in the air. Protocol 0 was the nuclear option. It was the kill switch I had built into the family trust, a failsafe designed for a worst-case scenario I had prayed would never happen. "Understood," Sir Whitman said. "Executing Protocol 0, freezing all supplementary accounts, revoking the credit authorization for the event, withdrawing the King Foundation endorsement." "And Mr. King?" "Yes." "Happy Christmas." I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. Then I sat back and watched. I did not have to wait long. It started subtly. I saw the lights in the grand ballroom flicker once, then stabilize. Then the beautiful jazz music that had been drifting out into the night cut off abruptly mid-note. I saw movement in the windows. The smooth, choreographed dance of the waiters stopped. I saw the head of the catering company, a man I knew well from my days as CEO, walk up to Bradley. I could not hear the words, but I knew the body language. He was holding a credit card reader. He was shaking it. He was looking at my son with the expression of a man who just realized he might not get paid. Bradley was waving his hands, his face flushing red even from this distance. He pointed at Monica. She opened her clutch and handed over her card. The waiter tried it. He shook his head. Then the main exterior floodlights, the ones that illuminated the house like a palace, died. The property plunged into darkness save for the dim emergency lights inside. The heating system, which was linked to the smart home grid controlled by the main account, would be shutting down next. I sat in the cold cab of my truck and felt a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the heater. They wanted me out of their lives. They wanted me gone. Well, I was gone, and I had taken my checkbook with me. The party was over. The guests just didn't know it yet, but the king had just left the building, and he had turned off the lights on his way out. I sat in the darkness of my truck cab watching the scene unfold through the large bay windows like a silent movie of disaster. It started with a ripple. One phone chimed, then another, then a dozen. It was the sound of the social guillotine falling. Whitman had sent the notification to the entire guest list. The message was concise and brutal. Notice of insolvency. The King family assets are frozen pending investigation into financial irregularities. All charitable commitments made tonight are null and void. To the sharks swimming in that ballroom, money was blood, and they just realized the water was empty. The mayor's wife was the first to move. She looked at her screen, her face twisting from polite boredom to open revulsion. She showed the screen to her husband. They stood up so abruptly, their chairs scraped loudly against the floor. They did not say goodbye. They marched toward the door, wrapping their furs tight around them as if the very air in the house had become infectious. Bradley ran after them, his hands fluttering uselessly. "Nancy, please wait," he begged. "It is a glitch. The bank is just doing a system update." Nancy turned at the door. Her voice carried through the glass, sharp enough to cut. Do not lie to me, Bradley. You are broke. You brought us here to solicit donations you cannot match. That is fraud. Do not call us again. That opened the floodgates. The investors, the partners, the friends who had laughed at my expense 5 minutes ago were now scrambling for the exits. They pushed past Monica, who stood frozen near the ice sculpture. You are a joke, a man in a velvet tuxedo sneered at Bradley. A cheap imitation of your father. Monica tried to grab the arm of a socialite she had been fawning over all night. Jessica. Wait, we have gift bags. We have diamonds in the gift bags. The woman pulled away as if Monica was burning. Keep your fake diamonds, she spat. I don't want to be here when the feds arrive. Within 10 minutes, the room was desolate. The only people left were the staff and my son and his wife standing in the ruins of their social standing. But the night was not done with them yet. The head caterer, Marcus, signaled his team to stop clearing the plates. He walked up to Bradley. He was a big man, with arms crossed over his chest. The terminals are down, Mr. King, Marcus said, his voice booming in the empty hall. Both cards declined. Insufficient funds. I will wire it in the morning. Bradley lied, wiping sweat from his forehead. No, Marcus said, stepping closer. You will pay now. 45,000. Or I call the precinct. Theft of services is a felony, Bradley. Do you want to spend Christmas in a cell? Bradley spun on Monica, his face purple with rage and panic. Give him the cash from the safe, he screamed. The emergency fund. I don't have it. Monica shrieked back, her voice shrill and ugly. I spent it on the deposit for the DJ. Because your card didn't work last week, remember? You told me the trust fund would unlock at midnight. You told me the old man was taken care of. He is gone, Bradley yelled, throwing a glass against the wall where it shattered. He cut us off. It is your fault. You treated him like a dog, and now he bit us. I watched them turn on each other like starving wolves. The love, the partnership, the united front. It all evaporated the moment the money ran out. They were alone in the dark house with a debt they couldn't pay and a silence where the applause used to be. I put the truck in gear. The heater rattled to life. I had a long drive to my motel, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel the cold. The neon sign of the Starlight Motel buzzed outside my window, casting a rhythmic red glow across the stained carpet. The room smelled of mildew and cheap cigarettes, a stark contrast to the pine and expensive perfume I had left behind at the mansion. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress and opened my laptop. It was a high-end military-grade machine, the only luxury I allowed myself in this exile. I typed in the encryption key, and the screen flickered to life, revealing a grid of 6 live feeds. I had installed the cameras months ago, not to spy on my son, but to watch over Mia. I needed to know she was safe when I couldn't be there. Tonight, however, the lenses were capturing the aftermath of a funeral for the living. On the screen labeled Living Room, I saw them. The main lights were still out thanks to my little trick with the power grid, but the emergency backup lighting cast long, ghostly shadows across the room. Bradley was pacing back and forth, his hands tearing at his hair. His tuxedo jacket was gone, his shirt unbuttoned and soaked with sweat. Monica was sitting on the sofa, her face buried in her hands, weeping not with sorrow, but with the terrified hysteria of a trapped animal. It is over, she sobbed, her voice tinny through the laptop speakers. We are finished, Bradley. The catering company will sue us. The investors saw everything. We are social lepers. Shut up, Bradley screamed, stopping his pacing to kick the coffee table. The catering bill is the least of our problems. Do you not understand what just happened? That was not a glitch. That was him. The old man cut the cord. He cannot do that, Monica wailed. You said he was senile. You said he didn't know how to access the accounts. He played us. Bradley hissed. He played us like a fiddle, and now we are exposed. He pulled his phone from his pocket and stared at it as if it were a bomb. I zoomed in on the feed. His hands were shaking so violently he almost dropped the device. "Sergey called me 5 minutes ago," Bradley whispered, and the fear in his voice made my blood run cold. Sergey. The name hit me like a physical blow. Sergey Petrov. The kind of loan shark who didn't send overdue notices, he sent body parts. "What did he say?" Monica asked, looking up, her makeup smeared down her cheeks. "He said he saw the lights go out," Bradley choked out. "He has people watching the house. He knows the party failed. He knows we didn't get the donations." "So what?" Monica asked, her voice trembling. "So the deal is off," Bradley yelled. "He gave us until New Year Eve to pay the $5 million or sign over the deed to this house. If we don't, he said he is going to liquidate the assets. And he wasn't talking about the furniture, Monica. He meant us. He said he would start with me, and then he would come for you and Mia." I sat back in the motel chair, the red neon light washing over my face. It wasn't just greed. It wasn't just that they wanted my money to buy fancy cars and throw parties. My son had sold his soul to the devil. He had borrowed $5 million from the Russian mob, likely to cover his gambling losses or failed investments, and he had put my house, my legacy, and my granddaughter as collateral. They weren't trying to sell the house to live in luxury. They were trying to sell it to stay alive. Monica stood up, grabbing Bradley by the lapels. "We have to make him sign," she hissed, her eyes wide with a desperate manic intensity. "If we get the power of attorney, we can sell the logistics company. We can pay Sergey. We have to find the old man and force him to sign." I leaned closer to the screen. Force him. I closed the laptop slowly. The anger that had been burning in my gut shifted. It cooled and hardened into something sharp and deadly. They weren't just ungrateful children anymore. They were cornered rats, and rats bite. I knew then that this wasn't just a lesson about money. This was a war for survival. And if I didn't win, if I didn't stop them, they would drag Mia down into the grave with them. I reached for my phone. It was time to call in the cavalry. I sat in the stale air of the motel room with my eyes glued to the laptop screen as the morning sun began to bleed through the cheap curtains. On the monitor, the living room of my former home was bathed in a gray hangover light. The mess from the night before was still there, scattered glasses and stained napkins like the debris of a lost battle. Then the front door opened without a knock. He walked in, Sergey Petrov. Even through the grainy camera feed, I could feel the temperature in the room drop. He was a mountain of a man, wearing a long cashmere coat that probably cost more than my son earned in a year. He did not look like a businessman. He looked like an executioner who enjoyed his work. Bradley scrambled off the sofa, his face pale and puffy from a sleepless night. He looked small next to the Russian. Monica stood by the fireplace, clutching her silk robe around her as if it were armor. She tried to muster some of her usual arrogance, but her voice cracked when she spoke. "Get out of my house," she squeaked. "You cannot just walk in here." Sergey did not even look at her. He walked slowly around the room, touching things with gloved hands. He stopped in front of the marble statue of Apollo I had bought in Greece 30 years ago. It was a priceless piece of art, a symbol of strength and beauty. Sergey looked at it with bored eyes. He reached out and grabbed the delicate, outstretched index finger of the statue. "Nice house, little King," Sergey said, his voice a low rumble that the microphone barely picked up. Very fragile, though. There was a sharp crack. It sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. The marble finger fell to the floor and shattered. Bradley flinched as if he had been physically struck. Sergey turned to my son. He held up his own gloved hand. "That was stone," he said calmly. "Bone is much softer, Bradley. Much easier to break." "Please," Sergey, Bradley begged, falling to his knees. "The bank transfer got stuck. My father, he froze the accounts. Just give me a week. I will fix it. You do not have a week, Sergei said, stepping over the broken marble. You have until the ball drops. New Year Eve, the Grand Hotel. I will be there in the front row. You will bring me $5 million, or you will bring me the deed to this property and the logistics company signed and notarized. And if we don't, Monica whispered. Sergei smiled. It was not a nice smile. If you do not, then I will start collecting collateral. I will start with your husband's fingers, then his hands. And when there is nothing left of him to break, I will come for the little girl. He turned and walked out, leaving the front door wide open to the freezing winter air. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. The threat against Mia changed everything. This was no longer about teaching a lesson. This was a rescue mission. I reached for my phone. I needed to get back into that house. I needed to walk back into the lion den not as a victim, but as the only monster capable of scaring the other monsters away. I sat on the edge of the motel bed with the laptop casting a pale blue light on my face, listening to the sound of my own murder being planned. On the screen, Monica was pacing the kitchen, holding her phone with a white knuckle grip. She had put the call on speaker, likely, so she could record it for her own twisted insurance. But tonight, she was unknowingly broadcasting her conspiracy directly to me. I know a way, Monica, the voice on the other end said, smooth and oily. It was Dr. Pierce, the family physician, the man who had prescribed Mia cough syrup when she was a baby, the man I had paid thousands of dollars to over the years. We are out of time, Dr. Monica snapped. The Russian will kill us in 5 days. We need access to the trust. We need the power of attorney. But the old man is gone. He will come back, Pierce said calmly. He always comes back for the girl. And when he does, we will be ready. I have a cocktail, a mix of sedatives and hallucinogens. It degrades the cognitive functions temporarily. It mimics rapid onset dementia. He will be confused. He will be suggestible. He will sign whatever you put in front of him just to make the voices stop. And afterwards, Monica asked. Afterwards, we certify him, Pierce replied. I have a bed waiting at the Whispering Pines facility, the state ward wing. Once he is in the system with a diagnosis of advanced senility, he will never get out. He will rot there, Monica, and you will be the sole executor of the estate. I felt a cold rage settle in my stomach, heavier than lead. They did not just want to kill me. Death was too kind. They wanted to steal my mind. They wanted to strip away my dignity and lock me in a cage until I forgot my own name. They wanted to turn the lion into a drooling vegetable so they could pick his bones clean. I reached for my satellite phone and dialed Russo. He picked up on the first ring. Russo, I said, my voice dropping an octave. I need a file on Dr. Pierce. I want to know everything. His debts, his mistresses, his malpractice suits. I want to know what makes him bleed. I am on it. Russo said, his voice tight. But Conrad, do not go back there. If they drug you, if they get that signature, we lose. Let me call the cops. We have the recording. No police, I said, staring at the screen where Monica was now pouring herself a drink, looking satisfied. Not yet. The police will arrest them for conspiracy, and they will be out on bail in 24 hours. And Sergei will still be out there waiting to hurt Mia. I need to finish this. Conrad, Russo warned. You are walking into a trap. I know, I said, standing up and grabbing my coat. But a trap only works if the prey does not know it is there. I am going to be the bait, Russo. I am going to let them think they have won. I am going to let them stick that needle in my arm. And when they think I am broken, when they think I am gone, I am going to show them what happens when you try to bury a man who is still alive. I hung up the phone. I looked at the grainy image of my daughter-in-law one last time. Enjoy your drink, Monica, I whispered. It is the last one you will ever taste in freedom. I packed the laptop. I checked the hidden camera button on my coat. I was going home, not to celebrate Christmas, but to burn the house down. I stood on the doorstep of the mansion for the second time in 24 hours. But this time I was not standing tall. I let my shoulders slump forward, collapsing into the shape of a man defeated by time. I allowed a tremor to take hold of my hands, the kind of shake that suggests weakness and decay. I practiced the vacant, confused look I had seen in the mirror of the motel room. To catch a wolf, you have to look like a wounded sheep. I knocked on the wood. It felt heavy and solid against my knuckles, a barrier between the cold truth outside and the hot lies waiting inside. The door opened. It was Bradley. He looked worse than he had on the camera feed. His eyes were red-rimmed and he smelled of stale scotch and fear. When he saw me, his first instinct was anger. I saw his fist clench the veins in his neck pulsing. But then he remembered the plan. He remembered the doctor orders. He remembered that he needed me broken, not dead. Not yet. "Dad," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I am sorry, Bradley," I mumbled, looking down at my boots, refusing to meet his eyes. "I do not know what happened last night. The lights. My card. I think I am confused, son. I just wanted to give Mia her doll. Did I ruin the party?" Bradley blinked. He looked at me, searching for the shark he knew I used to be. He was looking for the CEO who crushed competitors for sport. But he only saw a tired old man in a dirty coat. "It is okay, Dad," he said, stepping aside, a forced softness entering his tone. "Come in. It is freezing out here. You should not be driving in this condition." Then Monica appeared. She was wearing a cashmere sweater and jeans, looking the picture of domestic warmth. If I did not know she had been plotting to lobotomize me just hours ago, I might have been fooled. Her face transformed instantly. The sneer was gone, replaced by a saccharine smile that made my skin crawl. "Oh, Conrad," she cooed, rushing forward to take my arm, her nails digging slightly into my coat. "We were so worried about you. Where did you go? You looked so disoriented last night. We called everywhere." I let her lead me into the foyer. The house was quiet. The wreckage of the party had been cleared away, but the air still felt heavy with unspoken threats. I walked with a shuffle, dragging my left foot slightly, a nice touch I added to sell the performance. "I just want to see Mia," I repeated, playing the single note of a broken record. "I brought her a doll." "Of course," Monica said, patting my hand with a touch that felt like ice. "She is upstairs. But first you need to warm up. You look pale, Conrad. Sit down in the living room. I will make you some special herbal tea. It will help you relax." I sat on the sofa, the same one where Sergei had sat when he threatened to break my son's fingers. I watched Monica bustle into the kitchen. She was humming. It was the sound of a spider spinning a web. Bradley sat opposite me, watching me with the intensity of a man waiting for a bomb to go off. Monica returned with a steaming porcelain cup. The liquid was dark and smelled of peppermint and something sharp, something chemical underneath. "Drink this, Dad," she said, her eyes wide and unblinking. "It is good for the nerves. Dr. Pierce recommends it." I took the cup. My hands shook, spilling a little hot liquid onto my thumb. I did not flinch. I brought the cup to my lips, blowing on the steam. I looked at them over the rim. They were leaning forward, holding their breath, waiting for the cocktail to take hold, waiting for my mind to melt. I waited for a moment, when a heavy snowplow rumbled past outside, drawing their attention to the window for a split second. In that tiny window of time, I tipped the contents of the cup into the dense soil of the large potted fern beside the sofa. When they looked back, I was wiping my mouth, acting as if I had just swallowed their lie, hook, line, and sinker. "Thank you, Monica," I said, letting my eyelids droop heavily. "That tastes much better." I was in. The door was locked. The trap was sprung. But they didn't know that the poison was now in the soil, and I was still the most dangerous thing in the room. I stumbled up the grand staircase, clutching the banister as if my life depended on it. Monica watched me from the bottom of the steps, her arms crossed, a smug smile playing on her lips. She thought the drugs were kicking in. She thought I was a confused old man wandering toward his last moments of clarity. She did not know I was a soldier crossing enemy lines. The hallway on the second floor was warm, but as I climbed the narrow wooden steps to the attic, the temperature dropped. The air smelled of dust and neglect. This was not a room for a little girl. It was a storage closet for unwanted things. I pushed open the door, opened the haamang. The hinges groaned in the silence. The room was dim, lit only by a small window that let in the gray winter light. There were no toys on the floor, no colorful posters on the walls, just a small mattress on the floor and a thin blanket. Mia sat in the corner, her knees pulled up to her chest. She looked smaller than I remembered. Her face was pale, and her eyes, usually so bright and full of mischief, were wide with terror. When she saw me, she did not run to me. She did not yell, "Grandpa." She scuttled backward, pressing herself against the cold wall. "No," she whispered, covering her face with her hands. "Go away. Mommy said you are the monster. Mommy said you want to hurt me." The words hit me harder than any physical blow. They had not just locked her away. They had poisoned her mind. They had turned her own blood against her. Monica had twisted my love into a weapon to keep her terrified and compliant. I felt a tear, hot and angry, slide down my cheek. "Mia," I said softly, kneeling on the hard floorboards. "It is me. It is Grandpa. I brought you the doll. Remember the doll with the button eye?" "Liar," she screamed, her voice shrill with panic. "You are sick. You are crazy. You are going to hurt us. That is what Mommy said." I stayed where I was, letting her see my hands, letting her see was unarmed and gentle. I reached into my pocket. I did not pull out the doll. I pulled out a small, pink digital watch. It looked like a cheap toy, but inside the plastic casing was a military-grade GPS tracker linked directly to my satellite phone and Russo's server. "Look, sweet pea," I whispered, sliding the watch across the floor toward her. "This is a magic watch. It tells me where you are. It keeps the monsters away." She looked at the watch, then at me. Her fear wavered just for a second. Curiosity, the spark of the child she used to be, flickered in her eyes. She reached out and took it. "Put it on," I said. "Never take it off. Not for a bath. Not for sleep. Not for... as long as you wear that, Grandpa is right there with you. Can you do that for me?" She strapped it on her tiny wrist. It was too big, but she cinched it tight. She looked at me, and for a moment, I saw a glimmer of trust returning. "Are you really sick, Grandpa?" she asked. "No, sweet pea," I said, standing up, my knees cracking. "I am not sick, and I am going to get you out of here, I promise." I turned and walked out, closing the door on the most precious thing in my life. I descended the stairs, my heart burning with a cold, white fire. They had hurt my son. They had stolen my money. But they had terrified my granddaughter, and for that there would be no mercy. Dinner was served in the formal dining room under the crystal chandelier that I had bought in Paris 20 years ago. The table was set with fine china and heavy silver cutlery, the kind that feels cold and judgmental in your hands. I sat at the head of the table, a place that used to command respect, but now felt like the seat of the accused in a kangaroo court. Bradley sat to my right, drumming his fingers on the mahogany. Monica sat to my left, watching me with the predatory gaze of a hawk circling a dying rabbit. "Eat, Dad," Monica said, pushing a bowl of cream of mushroom soup toward me. "It is your favorite. I made it special just for you." The soup was thick and gray. I did not need a chemical analysis to know what was in it. The faint, acrid smell of crushed sedatives tried to hide behind the scent of mushrooms and heavy cream. It was a clumsy attempt at poisoning the kind of amateur work that insults a professional. I picked up my spoon, letting my hand tremble violently. The silver clattered against the china, a sharp, annoying sound that made Bradley flinch. "I am not very hungry," I mumbled, keeping my eyes low. "My stomach hurts." "You need to eat, Conrad." Monica insisted, her voice tight with forced patience. "You need your strength. The doctor said nutrition is vital for your condition." My condition. The lie they had manufactured to steal my life. I lifted the spoon halfway to my mouth, then let my hand spasm. It was a calculated jerk of the wrist. The spoon flipped. The bowl tipped. Hot gray sludge splashed across the pristine white tablecloth and onto my lap. "Oh no," I stammered, dropping the spoon. "Look what I did. I am so clumsy. I am sorry, Monica. I am so sorry." For a second, the mask slipped. Monica slammed her hands on the table, her face contorted with pure, unadulterated rage. "You stupid old fool," she hissed, starting to stand up. "Look at this mess. This is imported linen." Monica Bradley snapped, cutting her off. "Calm down." He didn't mean it. He is sick, remember. He looked at me not with pity, but with a cold calculation. He signaled to the maid to clean up the mess, but he did not let me leave the table. He reached under his chair and pulled out a leather folder. He placed it in front of me, right next to the stain of the spilled soup. "Since you are awake, Dad, we need to handle some paperwork," Bradley said, sliding a heavy fountain pen toward my shaking hand. "What is this?" I asked, squinting at the documents. The letters swam before my eyes, not because I couldn't see, but because I needed them to think I was blind. "It is just insurance forms." Bradley lied, his voice smooth and practiced. "For Mia. We need to update her medical coverage, but since the trust is in your name, we need your signature. It is for her health, Dad. You want Mia to be safe, don't you?" He was using her again, using my love for that little girl as leverage to pry open the vault. I looked down at the papers. I didn't need glasses to recognize a transfer of deed when I saw one. He wasn't asking for insurance. He was asking me to sign over the logistics company, the house, the land, everything. He was asking me to sign my own death warrant. I cannot read it," I said, pushing the papers away slightly. "It is too small." "Where are my glasses?" "Just sign on the line, Dad," Bradley said, his voice hardening, his patience fraying like a cheap rope. "You do not need to read it. I read it. It is standard. Just sign the damn paper, Conrad." He pressed the pen into my hand. His grip was hard, painful. He was not asking anymore. He was demanding. I looked at the tip of the pen hovering over the signature line. I looked at Monica, who was watching with bated breath, her anger forgotten in the face of greed. They were so close. They could almost taste the money. I gripped the pen awkwardly, like a child learning to write. I touched the paper. Then I pressed down hard, snapping the nib of the expensive pen against the table. Ink bled out onto the document, ruining the signature line in a pool of black. "Oh dear," I whispered, dropping the broken pen. "I broke it. I am useless, Bradley. I cannot do anything right." The silence in the room was deafening. Bradley stared at the ruined document, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. I sat back in my chair, looking at him with wide, watery eyes, hiding the wolf that was smiling behind them. I had bought myself another night. But I knew the next time they wouldn't use a pen. They would use something much sharper. The morning light filtered through the heavy curtains, gray and unforgiving. It was 10 o'clock when the devil arrived in a three-piece suit. Dr. Pierce walked into the living room with the confidence of a man who had sold his conscience long ago. He carried a black leather medical bag that looked more like a toolkit for demolition. Bradley and Monica stood by the fireplace, watching him with hungry eyes. They were not looking for a diagnosis. They were looking for a verdict. Pierce approached the armchair where I sat, my body slumped in a practiced posture of defeat. He did not look me in the eye. He checked my pulse, his fingers cold and clinical. Then he opened his bag. The click of the latches sounded like the cocking of a gun. He pulled out a syringe and a small vial of amber liquid. "Just a vitamin booster, Conrad," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "To help with the confusion. It will clear your head." I knew what it was. It was a cocktail of psychotropics designed to fry the neural pathways just enough to mimic advanced dementia. It would make me pliable. It would make me drool. It would make me sign anything just to make the walls stop breathing. I coughed, a dry, racking sound that shook my whole frame. "Water," I rasped, clutching my throat. "Please, doctor. I need water." Pierce sighed, annoyed by the delay. He turned to the side table to pour a glass from the pitcher. It was the oldest trick in the book. Misdirection. 60 years ago, in a dusty tent in Saigon, a street magician taught me how to make a coin disappear. It was a parlor trick then. Today, it was the difference between life and death. In the split second that Pierce's back was turned, my hand moved with a speed that belied my age. I pulled the pre-filled syringe of saline solution from my sleeve, a little insurance policy I had prepared from the bathroom supplies earlier that morning. I palmed Pierce's syringe and replaced it with mine on the tray. It took less than a second. When Pierce turned back, I was still clutching my throat, looking pathetic and helpless. "Here," he said, handing me the water. "Drink. Then we do this." I took a sip. Then I offered him my arm. He tied the tourniquet, finding the vein with practiced ease. He pushed the plunger. I watched the clear, harmless salt water enter my bloodstream. Now came the hard part. The performance. I counted to 3 silently. 1, 2, 3. I let my eyes roll back into my head. I stiffened my body, arching my back against the chair. I let out a guttural, choked sound. I began to convulse my limbs, jerking in a rhythmic, violent spasm. I knocked the water glass to the floor where it shattered. Foam gathered at the corners of my mouth. "Oh my God!" Monica screamed, stepping back. "What is happening? You killed him!" "He is reacting to the stimulant," Pierce said, his voice calm, but tinged with professional interest. "It confirms my diagnosis. His brain cannot handle the sensory input. It is a total cognitive collapse." I let the convulsions slow down, fading into a heavy, twitching stillness. I let my jaw go slack. I stared blankly at the ceiling, unblinking, even when Pierce shone a penlight into my eyes. "Is he gone?" Bradley asked, his voice trembling. "He is here," Pierce said, packing away his equipment. "But the Conrad you knew is gone. His mind is mush, Bradley. He is legally incapacitated." Pierce pulled a document from his bag. He placed it on the coffee table and uncapped a gold pen. He signed it with a flourish. "There," he said, handing the paper to Monica. "Certificate of mental incompetence. He is now a ward of the state. You have full power of attorney. You own him. You own the company. You own everything." Monica took the paper, her hands shaking with greed. She looked at me, the vegetable in the chair, and smiled. I lay there staring at nothing, listening to them celebrate my demise, while inside my mind was sharper than a razor blade. They had their paper. But I had my life, and the war was just beginning. They dragged me down the narrow wooden steps that led to the underbelly of the house. My heels bumped against each stair, sending jolts of pain up my spine, but I did not make a sound. To them, I was nothing more than a sack of unwanted laundry, a problem to be stored away until it expired. Bradley held my shoulders, his grip slippery with sweat, while Monica directed him from behind, her voice sharp and impatient. "Be careful, you idiot, do not drop him," she hissed. "If he breaks a hip, we have to deal with the ambulance, and I do not want any more strangers in this house." They dumped me onto a bare mattress in the corner of the basement. The concrete floor seeped cold through the thin fabric, chilling me to the bone. This room was not a guest suite. It was a dungeon. It smelled of wet earth and ancient decay. The single light bulb hanging from the ceiling cast long, flickering shadows that danced like ghosts on the damp walls. Monica stood over me, her silhouette looming large and distorted. She wrinkled her nose in disgust. "Search him," she ordered. "Take everything. I do not want him calling anyone in a moment of lucidity." Bradley knelt beside me. He patted down my coat pockets with trembling hands. He pulled out my wallet, the cheap leather one I carried as a prop. He took the few dollars inside and shoved them into his own pocket. Then he found the old flip phone. "Got it," he said, holding it up like a trophy. "Break it," Monica said. Bradley threw the phone against the concrete floor. It shattered into plastic shards. I lay there limp and motionless, forcing my breathing to remain shallow and rhythmic. My heart was hammering against my ribs, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of the deception. They were thorough, but they were amateurs. They checked the pockets, but they did not check the lining. Years ago, in a different life, I had learned the art of concealment. The satellite phone was stitched into the heavy wool padding of my coat just above the left kidney. It was flat, silent, and invisible to the naked eye. It was my lifeline, and they had missed it. Monica kicked my leg gently, at first, then harder. I did not react. "He is gone," she said with a cruel satisfaction. Pierce was right. The lights are on, but nobody is home. Leave him here. Let him rot in the dark. Maybe the rats will keep him company. She turned on her heel and marched up the stairs, the click of her heels fading into the distance. Bradley lingered for a second, looking down at me with a mixture of guilt and relief before following her. The heavy door slammed shut at the top of the stairs. The sound of the deadbolt sliding into place was final and absolute. I was alone. I opened my eyes. The basement was dim and quiet save for the steady drip of a leaking pipe somewhere in the darkness. I sat up slowly, rubbing the soreness from my limbs. I looked around my prison. In the corner, I saw a pair of red eyes reflecting the dim light. A rat the size of a kitten scurried along the baseboard, its claws scratching against the stone. Most men would have been terrified. A 72-year-old man locked in a freezing basement with vermin and mold abandoned by his own flesh and blood. But as I buttoned my coat tighter against the chill, I did not feel fear. I felt focus. They thought they had buried me. They thought this basement was my grave. They did not realize they had just given me a bunker. I reached into the lining of my coat and felt the hard, reassuring shape of the satellite phone. The battery was full. The signal was strong. I was down, but I was not out. And from this darkness, I was going to orchestrate their destruction. The heavy wooden door at the top of the stairs creaked open, slicing a wedge of yellow light into my darkness. Heavy boots descended the steps. It was not Monica with her sharp, clicking heels. It was the shuffling gait of a man walking to his own execution. Bradley. He carried a flashlight in one hand and that damned leather folder in the other. He pulled up an old milk crate and sat next to my mattress. The beam of the flashlight cut across his face, illuminating the tears that were already streaming down his cheeks. He smelled of fear and expensive scotch, a combination I had come to associate with my son. "Dad," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Can you hear me?" I turned my head slowly on the thin pillow. I looked at him with half-lidded eyes. I did not speak. I let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable, until he had to fill it with his own guilt. "I am so sorry, Dad." He sobbed, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. "I did not want it to be like this. Monica says it is the only way. We have to protect the family. We have to protect Mia." He opened the folder. The papers rustled in the damp air. He uncapped a pen and tried to press it into my hand. My fingers remained limp. "Please, Dad," he begged, leaning closer. "Just make a mark. An X, anything. If you sign this, we can sell the company. We can pay off the debts. Monica says she will let you come back upstairs. She will get you a nice room with a view. Just sign it. Do it for the family. Something inside me snapped. I had played the vegetable for hours. I had let them drug me, drag me, and humiliate me. But hearing him use the word family to justify his weakness was too much. The lion woke up. I sat up. It was a slow, deliberate movement that made Bradley freeze. I did not shake. I did not drool. I looked him dead in the eye, and the fog of the supposed dementia vanished from my gaze. Family. I said, my voice raspy but steady as a rock. Do not use that word, Bradley. You do not know what it means. Bradley recoiled as if I had slapped him. Dad, he stammered. You are lucid. I am more awake than you have ever been, I said, knocking the pen from his hand. It clattered onto the concrete. You say you are doing this for the family. I continued, my voice rising, echoing off the cold stone walls. You are lying to yourself. You are not doing this for Mia. You are not doing this for me. You are doing this because you are scared. Bradley scrambled backward, kicking over the milk crate. No, Dad. You do not understand. Sergei. He is going to kill us. He is going to kill you because you made a deal with him, I spat. You gambled away your inheritance. You borrowed money from wolves, and now you want to feed your father to them to save your own skin. To mouth. That is not family, Bradley. That is cowardice. I am not a coward, he screamed, but his eyes were full of shame. I am trying to save us. You are trying to save yourself, I said, cutting him off. You let your wife poison me. You let her lock your daughter in an attic. You let a stranger break my statues and threaten your home. You are not a man, Bradley. You are a shadow of the man I tried to raise. Bradley stood there, breathing heavily, his chest heaving. He looked at the papers on the floor, then at me. For a second, I saw a flicker of hesitation. I saw the boy who used to ask me to check under his bed for monsters. But the boy was gone. In his place was a desperate, weak man who owed $5 million to a butcher. He snatched up the papers. He did not look at me again. He turned and ran up the stairs, fleeing from the truth I had just forced him to swallow. He slammed the door and locked it, leaving me in the dark once more. He had the papers, but I had the victory. I had seen into his soul and found it empty. And now I knew exactly what I had to do. The time for parenting was over. The time for war had arrived. The rain hammered against the glass of Dr. Pierce's private clinic, washing away the grime of the Seattle streets, but unable to cleanse the filth inside. I picked the lock on the back door, with the ease of a man who had spent 20 years on the force and 10 more operating in the shadows. The tumbler clicked, a soft mechanical whisper that welcomed me into the lion den. Inside the clinic smelled of rubbing alcohol and expensive cologne, the scent of a man who thought he was untouchable. I moved through the dark hallway, my tactical boots silent on the polished marble floor. I was not here for drugs. I was here for leverage. Conrad King was rotting in a freezing basement because of a lie, and I was here to dig up the truth. I reached Pierce's private office. The mahogany desk was massive, a monument to his ego. I did not waste time with the drawers. Men like Pierce keep their real secrets in a safe. I found it behind a pretentious oil painting of himself. It was a high-end digital model, but I had brought a decoder. 30 seconds later, the green light flashed. The heavy steel door swung open, revealing a gold mine of corruption. Stacks of cash rubber banded in messy piles. Vials of unlabeled clear liquid, the vitamins he had been injecting into Conrad. I pocketed 2 vials for the lab boys to analyze, though I already knew it was likely a psychotropic blend. But the real treasure was the black ledger at the bottom. I opened it. It was not a medical chart. It was a price list. Beside the name Conrad King was a figure that made my stomach turn. $50,000. That was the price of a man's sanity. Next to it was a note in pierced, jagged handwriting. Subject susceptible to scopolamine compound. Induce psychosis. Signatures required by New Year Eve. I pulled out my phone and snapped photos of everything. The cash, the vials, the ledger. I found a fake patient file detailing a dementia diagnosis, dated 2 weeks ago, long before Conrad had even stepped foot in that house. This was not malpractice. This was a conspiracy to commit murder by proxy. Suddenly I heard the front door chime. Footsteps echoed in the lobby, heavy and fast. A security patrol, or maybe Pierce himself, coming back to count his blood money. I did not panic. I slipped the ledger into my jacket. I moved to the window, sliding it open just enough to squeeze through. The cold, wet air hit my face. As I dropped into the alleyway below, landing in a crouch, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I stayed in the shadows of a dumpster, shielding the screen from the rain. I typed a message to the satellite phone stitched into an old man coat miles away. Package secured. The doctor is dirty. I have the files, the drugs, and the money trail. We have enough to bury him. Waiting for your signal to pull the trigger. I hit send. The message flew through the encrypted network, a digital bullet aimed straight at the heart of the conspiracy. I watched the progress bar hit 100%. Then I disappeared into the night. The evidence was safe. Now it was up to Conrad to stay alive long enough to use it. The silence in the basement was heavy, but it was not empty. I sat on the damp mattress, counting the drips from the ceiling pipe like a prisoner marking time. My eyes had adjusted to the gloom, but my ears were straining for something else. I knew this house. I built it. I knew that the ventilation shaft in the corner ran straight up to the master bedroom closet. It was an architectural quirk, a flaw I had never bothered to fix. Now it was my intelligence network. I dragged the milk crate over to the wall and stood on it, pressing my ear against the cold metal grate. At first, there was only the hum of the furnace. Then came the click of heels. Monica. She was in the bedroom directly above me. She was pacing. I could hear the rustle of fabric, probably packing a suitcase. Then her phone rang. "Hey, baby," she said. Her voice was different. It was not the shrill harpy who screamed at me. It was not the fake doting daughter-in-law. It was sultry, dangerous, and full of a secret joy. I held my breath. Who was she talking to? It wasn't Bradley. She spoke to Bradley like he was a dog. She was speaking to this person like he was a partner. "Do not worry," she cooed. "The old man is breaking. He is lucid, but he is weak." Bradley tried the guilt trip. It didn't work, but the cold will. Give him another night. He will sign. There was a pause as she listened to the voice on the other end. I recognized the deep baritone rumble drifting through the vent, even though I couldn't make out the words. It was the family lawyer, the man who was supposed to protect the King estate, the man I paid a retainer to every month. They were sleeping together. I know. Monica laughed softly. As soon as the deed transfers, we liquidate. The buyer is ready in Hong Kong. 45 million cash wire transfer. And then we are gone. Cabo is lovely this time of year. Another pause. Then she said the words that made my fists clench so hard my knuckles turned white. Bradley. Oh, please. He is not coming with us. He is the fall guy, remember? He signed the loan documents with Sergei. He signed the fraudulent tax returns. When the dust settles and the mob comes looking for their money, they will find Bradley. And when the feds come looking for the embezzlement, they will find Bradley. We will be sipping margaritas on the beach while he is getting torn apart in federal prison. He is a useful idiot, darling. Nothing more. She laughed again, a cold sound that echoed down the metal shaft and settled in the pit of my stomach. I stepped down from the crate. I sat back on the mattress, feeling a strange new weight in my chest. It wasn't anger. It was pity. My son was a coward. He was a gambler. He was a weak man who had tried to sell his father to save his own skin. But he was also a patsy. He was being played by a woman he adored and a lawyer he trusted. They were leading him to the slaughterhouse, and he was walking in willingly holding the knife for them. I looked at the ceiling. "You are a fool, Bradley," I whispered into the darkness. "You are a damn fool. But you are my fool, and I will be damned if I let that witch feed you to the sharks." I wasn't just fighting for Mia anymore. I was fighting to save a son who didn't even know he was already dead. The sound of a child coughing is the loudest sound in the world to a grandfather, especially when it echoes down a cold ventilation shaft in the dead of night. It started as a dry rasp, then deepened into a wet, racking hacking that shook the dust from the ceiling beams. I stood on the milk crate, my ear pressed against the metal grate, my heart hammering a rhythm of pure panic. Upstairs, I heard the heavy thud of footsteps. Bradley's voice drifted down, muffled but frantic. "Monica, she is burning up. The thermometer says 103. We need to call an ambulance." "No." Monica's voice cut through the air, sharp and lethal as a scalpel. "No ambulances, Bradley. Do you know what happens when paramedics see bruises on a child? Do you know what happens when they see the old man locked in the basement? They call the police, and if the police come, Sergei finds out we lost control. Give her a Tylenol and shut the door." "But she is shaking," Bradley pleaded. "She will sleep it off," Monica snapped. "Go back to bed. We have a big day tomorrow." Silence fell again, but the coughing continued. It was a weak, desperate sound. My granddaughter was suffering alone in the dark while her father cowered and her stepmother calculated her odds of survival. I stepped down from the crate. The act was over. The trembling old man vanished. In his place stood a man who had survived jungles and boardrooms, a man who knew that rules were just suggestions when lives were on the line. I walked to the heavy wooden door at the top of the stairs. It was locked from the outside with a heavy iron slide bolt, a formidable barrier for a geriatric, a minor inconvenience for a former marine engineer. I jammed the flat edge of a metal spoon I had stolen from the dinner tray into the narrow gap between the door and the frame. I found the friction point of the bolt. I applied pressure. Not the jerky, weak force of an old man, but the steady leverage of 200 pounds of muscle and rage. Wood groaned. Iron screeched. With a final shove, the bolt slid back just enough to clear the latch. I pushed the door open. I moved into the hallway silent as a shadow. My joints didn't creak. My breath didn't hitch. I moved with the predatory grace of a ghost haunting his own house. I climbed the stairs to the attic. The door was locked, but the key was sitting on the ledge of the doorframe. A lazy mistake Monica would regret. I turned the lock and slipped inside. The room was freezing, but Mia was radiating heat like a furnace. Her hair was plastered to her forehead with sweat. She was thrashing under the thin blanket, whimpering in a delirium. "Grandpa," she whispered, her eyes unfocused. "The monsters are here." "I am here, sweet pea," I whispered, kneeling beside her. I pulled a cold compress I had made from a wet sock and snow from the windowsill, placing it gently on her forehead. I lifted her head and helped her sip water from the bottle I had brought. I crushed a tablet of aspirin I had carried in my pocket since my arrival, mixing it into the water. "You are safe," I told her, stroking her hair. "The monsters cannot touch you. Not while I am breathing." I stayed for 10 minutes, bringing her temperature down, watching her breathing steady into a peaceful rhythm. She gripped my finger, her small hand burning hot, but holding on for dear life. I wanted to stay. I wanted to carry her out of that house right then and run until my legs gave out. But then I heard it. The floorboards in the master bedroom creaked. A door opened. Bradley was up. He was coming to check on her, or worse, check on me. I kissed her forehead one last time. I slipped out of the room, locking the door behind me and placing the key back exactly where I found it. I practically slid down the banister, my movements a blur. I reached the basement door just as the light in the upstairs hallway clicked on. I pulled the door shut, engaging the mechanism I had rigged to make it look bolted from the inside. I threw myself onto the mattress, pulling the dirty blanket up to my chin. Seconds later, the peephole in the door slid open. A beam of light swept the room, landing on my face. I let out a snore, a wet, pathetic sound of a senile old man dreaming of nothing. The peephole slid shut. I opened my eyes in the darkness. My heart was slowing down, but my resolve was harder than ever. They had almost killed her. Tonight was a skirmish. Tomorrow at the Grand Hotel it would be a massacre. The courier arrived at noon, cutting through the silence of the house like a knife. He did not knock gently. He pounded on the heavy oak door with a rhythm that demanded attention. I was already at my post, standing on the milk crate, my ear pressed against the cold metal of the ventilation grate. I heard the door open. I heard the muffled baritone of a man who was not paid to be polite. "Delivery for Mr. King," the stranger said. "Sign here." The door slammed shut. I heard Bradley's footsteps, hurried and uneven, retreating into the living room. Then silence. A long, heavy silence that stretched until it snapped. Oh God. It was Bradley. It was a sound I had never heard from him before. It was not the whine of a spoiled child or the shout of an angry man. It was the guttural, animalistic whimper of pure terror. "What is it?" Monica's voice was sharp, brittle. "Open it." I heard the tearing of paper, then the sound of something heavy and metallic hitting the hardwood floor. Then a scream. "It is blood," Bradley shrieked, his voice climbing an octave. "There is blood everywhere." I closed my eyes in the dark basement, imagining the scene above. Sergei Petrov did not send Hallmark cards. He sent messages that stained the carpet. "It is my watch," Bradley sobbed. "My Patek Philippe. The one Dad gave me for graduation. It is smashed. Look at the glass. It is pulverized. And the blood, Monica. Whose blood is this?" "There is a note," Monica whispered. Her voice was trembling now, the arrogance finally stripped away by the reality of their situation. "Read it," Bradley choked out. "Tonight. The Grand Hotel. The midnight gala. Bring the papers or bring a body bag. No money, no life." The message hung in the air, drifting down through the vents to where I stood in the cold. It was the deadline. The ultimatum. Sergei was done playing games. He was calling in the debt, and he expected payment in full when the ball dropped. "We are dead," Bradley moaned. "We cannot get the money in time. The trust is still locked. The old man hasn't signed." "Then make him sign," Monica hissed. The fear in her voice had turned into a frantic, dangerous energy. "We do not have a choice anymore, Bradley. Forget the drugs. Forget the doctor. We do not have time for him to get confused. We need that signature now." "But he is stubborn." Bradley wept. He broke the pen. He spilled the soup. He fights back. "Then we stop being nice," Monica said. Her heels clicked on the floor, pacing back and forth like a caged tiger. "We stop trying to trick him. We break him. We have the leverage right upstairs." "No," Bradley said, his voice weak. "Not Mia." "It is her or us," Monica screamed. "Do you want Sergei to cut you into pieces? Do you want to end up like that watch? We take the girl. We show him what happens if he says no. We put a knife to her throat if we have to. He loves her more than his money. He will sign." I stepped down from the crate. My hands were fists at my sides. They were not just desperate. They were rabid. The external threat of the Russian mob had squeezed the last drop of humanity out of them. They were coming for me. And they were bringing my granddaughter into the line of fire. I checked the time on the wall. It was early afternoon. The Grand Hotel Gala was hours away. I smoothed my coat. I flexed my fingers. I was not going to wait for them to come down here and drag me out. I was going to be ready. They wanted a signature. They were going to get a war. The time for hiding was over. Tonight at the Grand Hotel, the King family legacy would end. But I would determine how the final chapter was written. The basement door didn't just open, it exploded inward. Light flooded the darkness, blinding me as heavy hands grabbed my coat. They didn't ask me to walk this time. Bradley and a hired security guard hauled me up the stairs, my feet dragging against the steps. I didn't fight back. Not yet. I let them throw me onto the Persian rug in the living room, the same spot where I had fallen just yesterday. But the room had changed. It was no longer a party venue. It was a hostage scene. And then I saw her. Mia. My granddaughter was sitting on a straight-backed chair in the center of the room. She was trembling so hard the chair legs chattered against the floor. Standing behind her was Monica. In one hand, she gripped Mia's shoulder, her nails digging into the little girl's sweater. In the other hand, she held a 6-inch kitchen knife. The blade hovered just inches from Mia's throat. "Sign the papers." "Conrad." Monica screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "Sign them now, or I swear to God I will make you watch her bleed." I looked at Bradley. My son stood by the table holding the transfer documents. He looked sick, pale, and sweating, but he didn't move to stop her. He looked at the knife, then at me, and his eyes begged me to surrender. "Dad, please," he whispered. "Just sign it. She is crazy. She will do it. You are a monster." I said, my voice low and dangerous. "She is a child, Monica. She is your daughter." "She is leverage," Monica spat, pressing the knife closer. Mia whimpered a sound that tore my heart in two. "I don't care about anything anymore except that money. Sergei is coming. I will not die today, Conrad." But she might. I looked at the terror in Mia's eyes. I saw the absolute desperation in Monica's face. She wasn't bluffing. A cornered rat will bite anything, even its own young. I had pushed them to the edge, and now they were looking into the abyss. "Okay," I shouted, holding up my shaking hands. "Okay, you win. I will sign. Just put the knife down." Bradley rushed forward, slamming the documents onto the coffee table. He shoved a cheap plastic pen into my hand. "Here," he panted. "Sign it. Transfer of the Kingston Logistics Group. Full ownership to Bradley and Monica King. Do it." I took the pen. My hand shook violently. I let the pen slip from my fingers. It rolled under the sofa. I dropped it. I stammered, "I need a pen." Bradley groaned, dropping to his knees to search for it. In that split second of distraction, while Monica watched her husband and Bradley watched the floor, I reached into my sleeve. I pulled out my own pen, a heavy black Mont Blanc. It looked identical to the ones I used to sign billion-dollar contracts with. Except this one was filled with a proprietary ink used by intelligence operatives. It wrote black. It dried black. But within 60 minutes of exposure to air, it would vanish completely, leaving the paper pristine and blank. "I found it," I said quickly, effectively hiding the switch as Bradley stood up empty-handed. I pressed the nib to the paper. I looked Monica in the eye. "I am signing," I said. "Let her go." I scrawled my name, Conrad Arthur King, on the dotted line. The ink flowed dark and permanent-looking. "Done," Bradley yelled, snatching the papers before the ink was even dry. "We have it. We have the company." Monica threw the knife onto the sofa and shoved Mia away. "We are rich," she laughed, a manic, terrifying sound. "We are saved." I pulled Mia into my arms, burying her face in my coat, so she wouldn't see her father crying with relief over a stolen fortune. They thought they had just won an empire. They didn't know they had just signed a contract with a ghost, using ink that was already beginning to die. "Get him cleaned up," Monica ordered, standing in the doorway of the bathroom, her arms crossed over her chest. "He smells like a basement, and if we are going to the Grand Hotel, he needs to look like a billionaire, not a vagrant." She threw a towel at me and walked away, leaving the door ajar as if I were a child who could not be trusted to wash himself. I stood under the scalding water, watching the grime of the last 2 days swirl down the drain. The dirt from the fall in the snow, the dust from the attic, the grease from the basement floor, it all washed away. But as the physical filth disappeared, something else vanished too. The act, the stoop in my shoulders, the tremble in my hands, the vacancy in my eyes. The water did not just clean me, it baptized me. It stripped away the mask of the feeble old man I had worn to survive and revealed the steel that lay beneath. When I stepped out, Bradley was waiting. He held a garment bag in his hands. It was my old tuxedo, the one I had worn to meet presidents and prime ministers. He laid it out on the bed. The black fabric was crisp, the satin lapels gleaming under the bedroom lights. It was not just clothing. It was armor. "Put this on," Bradley said, avoiding my gaze. "And hurry, the limo is waiting. We have to meet Sergei at 11. I dressed in silence. The shirt was starched and stiff against my skin. The trousers settled on my waist with a familiar weight. I buttoned the vest. I fastened the studs. My hands did not shake. My fingers moved with the precision of a surgeon. Bradley reached out to help me with the bow tie. "Let me do it, Dad," he said, his voice nervous. "You usually fumble with this." I slapped his hand away. It was a sharp, audible sound that made him jump. "I can tie my own damn tie," I said, my voice dropping the raspy facade. I stood before the full-length mirror. The man looking back at me was not the confused retiree they had drugged and imprisoned. The gray hair was combed back. The jaw was set hard. The eyes were cold and calculating. The Conrad King, who built an empire from a garage, was back. I adjusted my cuffs, feeling the heavy gold links click into place. They thought they were dressing up a puppet for a show. They thought they were dragging a senile old man to a slaughter. They had no idea they were dressing a general for war. "You look fine," Bradley stammered, clearly unsettled by the transformation, though he couldn't quite place why. I turned to him. I did not smile. I did not slouch. I stood to my full height, towering over him despite his youth. "Let us go, Bradley," I said, my voice echoing with a command that made him flinch. "You have a deal to close, and I have a party to attend." I walked past him, my stride long and purposeful. I was walking into the lion's den, but for the first time in days, I wasn't the prey. I touched the pocket where the disappearing ink pen rested. I checked the watch that tracked Mia. I felt the satellite phone against my ribs. The costume was complete. The stage was set. The king was returning to his castle, and there would be hell to pay for the usurpers. The black limousine slid against the curb of the Grand Hotel like a hearse arriving at a cemetery. The engine purred a low vibration that I could feel through the leather seats, but inside the cabin, the silence was absolute and suffocating. Bradley sat across from me, his knees bouncing with a nervous energy that shook the whole car. He kept checking his phone, wiping his sweaty palms on his tuxedo trousers. Monica sat next to me, her perfume cloying and thick, masking the scent of fear that radiated off my son. "We are here," Monica announced, her voice tight. "Remember the plan." We walk in. We find Sergei. We hand over the papers. We leave. And Conrad. She turned to me, her eyes narrowing into slits. "If you say a word, if you blink wrong, if you try to signal anyone, remember where your granddaughter is." I looked out the tinted window. The valet stand was bustling. I saw a dark SUV parked near the entrance with a man standing by the door. That was where they had left Mia. locked in a car with a hired thug while her family went inside to sell her future. The rage flared hot in my chest, but I packed it down tight. Not yet. The chauffeur opened the door. The cold December air rushed in, biting and clean. I stepped out onto the red carpet. The Grand Hotel. I had designed this entrance myself 40 years ago. I knew every brick, every pillar, every hidden camera angle. To Monica and Bradley, this was just a venue. To me, it was home court advantage. We moved toward the revolving brass doors. The head doorman, a man named Henry, who had worked for me since the day we opened, was standing guard. He saw the group approaching. He saw Bradley looking pale and frantic. Then he saw me. His eyes went wide. He started to step forward, his hand raising to the brim of his cap. "Mr. King," he began, his voice filled with genuine relief and surprise. "I haven't seen you in—" I locked eyes with him. I gave a microscopic shake of my head. I raised my index finger slightly, almost imperceptibly, to my lips. Henry stopped. He was a good man. He had seen everything in this city, from affairs to business deals. He knew how to read silence. He swallowed his greeting. He stiffened his posture and opened the door wide, staring straight ahead as if I were a stranger. "Good evening, sir," Henry said, his voice flat. "Welcome to the Grand." I nodded as I passed him. I saw the confusion in his eyes, but I also saw the loyalty. He wouldn't blow my cover. We entered the lobby. It was a sea of diamonds and black ties. The chandelier, a cascading waterfall of crystal, sparkled overhead. The smell of expensive champagne and fresh orchids filled the air. It was a world of illusion. Everyone here was smiling, everyone was pretending to be happy, but underneath it all was the raw hunger for power. Monica gripped my arm, her fingernails digging into my bicep through the fabric of my tuxedo. She steered me through the crowd like a prize show dog. "Smile, Dad," she hissed in my ear. "You are happy. You are retiring. You are handing over the reins. Do not embarrass us." I looked at Bradley. He was scanning the room, his head swiveling back and forth. He wasn't looking at the architecture or the guests. He was hunting for the predator he had summoned. "There he is," Bradley whispered, his face draining of all color. I followed his gaze. At the far end of the lobby, near the entrance to the ballroom, sat a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite. Sergei. He was waiting. And the air in the opulent lobby suddenly felt very thin. The trap was set, the players were on the board, and my son was walking us straight into the throat of the beast. The table was positioned front and center, right at the edge of the dance floor, a spot reserved for royalty, or in this case for the man holding the executioner's axe. Sergei Petrov did not blend in. While the other guests sipped champagne and nibbled on delicate pastries, Sergei was tearing into a rare steak with a ferocity that made the people at the neighboring tables turn away in disgust. He wore a tuxedo, but he wore it like a prison uniform, straining at the seams of his massive shoulders. A bottle of vodka sat in the ice bucket, replacing the vintage Dom Perignon that belonged there. We arrived at the table. Bradley was shaking so hard I thought he might faint. Monica smoothed her dress, trying to summon the arrogance that usually shielded her, but her smile was brittle as glass. "Mr. Petrov," Monica began, her voice trembling slightly. "It is an honor to—" "Sit down," Sergei interrupted without looking up from his plate. He spoke with his mouth full, a grotesque display of dominance. "You talk too much. I do not like women who talk too much." Monica turned crimson. She sat down, snapping her mouth shut, her humiliation burning on her cheeks. I took the seat opposite him, sinking into the velvet chair with the practiced slowness of the infirm. I let my mouth hang open slightly, a subtle touch to sell the lie. "Do you have it?" Sergei asked, wiping his grease-stained lips with a linen napkin and throwing it onto the floor. "Yes," Bradley squeaked. He pulled the leather folder from his jacket. His hands were wet with sweat, leaving damp marks on the leather. "Here. The transfer of ownership. The logistics company. The house. It is all signed. Sergei snatched the folder. He didn't just open it, he ripped it open. His eyes scanned the documents. He traced the signature with a thick sausage-like finger. The ink, my disappearing ink, was still dark and fresh. It looked legal. It looked permanent. For now. Good, Sergei grunted, closing the folder. You live another day, little king. Then he looked at me. The air in the room seemed to freeze. Sergei leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. His eyes were small, dark, and devoid of anything resembling a soul. He stared at me with the intensity of a predator sniffing the wind. He didn't look at my clothes or my cane. He looked straight into my eyes. Who is this? He asked, pointing a steak knife at my chest. It is my father, Bradley stammered. Conrad. You met him once before. Years ago. Sergei narrowed his eyes. He tilted his head. I know the name. But the face. I have seen this face. Not in a boardroom. Not in a magazine. He leaned closer until I could smell the vodka and onions on his breath. You have the eyes of a killer old man, Sergei whispered. I have seen those eyes in the gulag. Those are not the eyes of a sheep. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced my pulse to remain steady. He was sensing the soldier beneath the skin. He was recognizing the darkness in me because it called to the darkness in him. He is sick, Mr. Petrov. Monica interjected quickly, desperate to break the tension. He has dementia. He doesn't know where he is. Look at him. He is drooling. I let a small line of saliva escape the corner of my mouth. I blinked rapidly, looking confused. Where is the pudding? I mumbled loud enough for the table to hear. I was promised pudding. Sergei stared at me for another long second. Then he laughed. It was a barking, cruel sound. Pudding, he mocked. You are right. He is a vegetable, a useless eater. He sat back, losing interest in me, dismissing the threat his instincts had warned him about. He poured himself a shot of vodka. Go get the money transfer ready, Bradley, he ordered. I want the funds in my account by midnight. I sat there, wiping my chin, playing the fool. He had looked into the abyss and blinked. He thought I was nothing. That was his second mistake. His first was threatening my family, and he wouldn't live long enough to make a third. I looked at the folder sitting near his elbow. The clock was ticking. The ink was fading. And it was time for me to disappear too. I let out a low groan, clutching my stomach with both hands. It was a sound of pathetic frailty that cut through the tension at the table like a rusty knife. Monica rolled her eyes, her disdain undisguised. I need to use the facilities. I mumbled, my voice weak and thready. Nature calls, Monica. It is urgent. Monica sighed loud enough for the neighboring table to hear. She signaled to the man standing behind her chair. It was Davis, the hired muscle she had brought to ensure I didn't make a scene. He was a wall of meat in a cheap suit, a man who clearly preferred lifting weights to reading books. Go with him, Monica ordered, waving a dismissive hand. Make sure he doesn't get lost. And Davis, do not let him talk to anyone. Davis grabbed my upper arm, his grip bruisingly tight. Come on, Pops, he grunted, hauling me out of the chair. Let us make this quick. I don't want to miss the appetizers. I shuffled across the ballroom floor, leaning heavily on my cane, dragging my left foot. Davis walked half a step behind me, radiating impatience. He thought he was escorting a prisoner. He didn't know he was walking into a kill box. We entered the men's restroom near the kitchen service entrance. It was empty, lined with black marble and smelling of lemon polish. The heavy door hissed shut behind us, sealing out the noise of the party. Davis leaned back against the door, crossing his massive arms over his chest. He didn't even bother to check the stalls. He was arrogant. He was sloppy. Hurry up, old man, he sneered. You have 2 minutes before I drag you out. I moved toward the sink, turning on the tap. I watched him in the mirror. He was looking at his phone, texting. His chin was down. His guard was down. I straightened my spine. The cane dropped from my hand, clattering loudly onto the tile. Davis looked up, startled. What the hell are you doing? He began. 1. I spun around. I didn't move like a 70-year-old. I moved with the explosive torque of a man who had trained in hand-to-hand combat before this boy was born. My left hand shot out, chopping hard into his throat, crushing the windpipe. He gagged, his eyes bulging. 2. As he doubled over, clutching his throat, I stepped in. I grabbed the back of his neck with one hand and his belt with the other. Using his own downward momentum against him, I drove my knee up into his solar plexus. The air left his lungs in a violent whoosh. 3. I guided his falling body forward, slamming his forehead against the marble countertop with a sickening crack. He went limp, instantly sliding to the floor like a sack of wet cement. 3 seconds. No sweat. No wasted motion. I adjusted my cufflinks, checking for blood. Clean. One of the stall doors creaked open. A man in a gray maintenance uniform stepped out, pushing a mop bucket. He wore a cap pulled low over his eyes. He looked at the unconscious giant on the floor, then at me. You still have a mean right hook, boss, Russo said, lifting his cap with a grin. I kicked Davis' legs out of the way and dragged him into the handicap stall, propping him up on the toilet. Did you bring the package? I asked, locking the stall door from the inside and crawling out under the gap. Russo handed me a small tablet and a tiny flesh-colored earpiece. You have full administrative access, Russo said. I hacked the hotel security grid. You control the lights, the sound, the locks, and the cameras. The kitchen staff is briefed. They are just waiting for your signal to lock the service doors. I put the earpiece in. It vanished into my ear canal. I tapped the tablet, watching the live feeds of the ballroom flicker to life in my hand. I saw Sergei pouring another drink. I saw Bradley wiping sweat from his forehead. They were sitting on a powder keg, and I had just lit the fuse. Get out of here, Russo, I said, slipping the tablet into my tuxedo jacket. Things are about to get loud. I messed up my hair slightly to look disheveled. I picked up my cane. I opened the restroom door and shuffled back out into the hallway, the confused old man once again. But now the old man had the finger on the trigger of the entire building. I walked out of the restroom, wiping my hands on a silk handkerchief, and turned the corner into the long corridor that led back to the ballroom. It was a quiet hallway lined with velvet drapes and the heavy scent of lilies. I expected to walk back to the table uninterrupted, but I should have known better. Monica was waiting for me. She was standing by the entrance to the VIP coat check room, her arms crossed and her foot tapping a frantic rhythm against the marble. She looked past me, searching the shadows for her hired muscle. Where is Davis? She hissed, stepping into my path. He was supposed to bring you back 5 minutes ago. Why are you alone? I stopped walking. I didn't hunch my shoulders. I didn't drag my foot. I stood straight, my chest expanding, my presence filling the narrow hallway. I looked down at her, and for the first time in 3 days, I let the mask drop completely. I let her see the man she had tried to erase. Davis is taking a nap. Monica, I said, my voice deep and devoid of any tremor. He had a sudden headache. Monica froze. Her eyes went wide, scanning my face. She was looking for the drool, the confusion, the vacancy of the dementia she had paid so much money to manufacture. But she found only ice. The realization hit her like a physical slap. She took a step back, her breath hitching in her throat. You, she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and terror. You are not sick. You are faking it. You heard everything. I took a step toward her. I heard enough to know that you are a parasite, I said calmly. And the host has decided to start the treatment. Panic is a dangerous thing. It makes people stupid. Monica glanced at a room service cart that had been left near the wall. On a silver platter next to a half-eaten cheese plate lay a sharp paring knife used for cutting fruit. She didn't think. She acted on pure instinct. She snatched the knife, her hand shaking violently, and pointed the gleaming blade at my chest. "Get back!" she screamed, her voice shrill and echoing in the empty hall. "Get back, or I will swear to God, I will gut you right here. I will tell them you attacked me. I will tell them I had to defend myself." She lunged. It was a desperate, clumsy strike aimed at my stomach. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I stepped in. My left hand shot out, catching her wrist in a vice grip before the blade could graze my tuxedo. I squeezed. I pressed my thumb into the pressure point between the tendons. Monica gasped, her eyes bulging in pain. Her fingers spasmed, and the knife clattered harmlessly onto the marble floor. I didn't let go. I twisted her arm behind her back, forcing her to bend forward, pushing her face into the velvet coat check counter. She struggled, kicking her heels, but against my strength, she was nothing more than a child throwing a tantrum. I leaned down close to her ear, so close I could smell the fear radiating off her skin. "You made a mistake, Monica." I whispered, my voice a low rumble. "You thought you were fighting a helpless old man. You thought you were fighting a victim. But you chose the wrong opponent. You picked a fight with a soldier. And now you are a prisoner of war." I shoved her forward. She stumbled into the coat check room, tripping over a pile of mink coats. Before she could turn around, I slammed the heavy door shut. I turned the brass key in the lock. I heard her fists pounding against the wood. I heard her muffled screams for help, but the music from the ballroom drowned her out. I dropped the key into my pocket. I straightened my tie. I checked my reflection in the mirror next to the door. I looked composed. I looked ready. I walked back toward the party, leaving the wicked witch in the closet. 1 down, 2 to go. Bradley stood near the edge of the polished dance floor, holding a crystal glass of champagne that had gone warm in his gripping hand. He looked like a man drowning in plain sight, surrounded by a sea of people who were too busy breathing air to notice his struggle. The jazz band was playing a cheerful swing tune, but to Bradley, it must have sounded like a funeral march. He kept checking his phone, tapping the screen aggressively, as if he could force the banking app to refresh by sheer will. But the screen remained stubborn. 0 balance. Pending transaction. He looked around for Monica. She had vanished 20 minutes ago to find his father, and neither had returned. He looked for Davis, the bodyguard. Gone. He was alone, totally and terrifyingly alone in a room full of strangers who would step over his body to get to the buffet. 2 men in ill-fitting suits stepped out from the shadows of the decorative pillars. They were not guests. They were Sergei's lieutenants, the ones who did the dirty work that even the boss wouldn't touch. One of them, a man with a jagged scar running down his cheek, leaned in close to Bradley. He didn't shout. He whispered, and somehow that was worse. "Tick-tock, little prince," the scarred man said. "The boss is getting thirsty, and he doesn't like waiting for his drink." Bradley swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously against his tight collar. "It is coming," he stammered, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace of pain. "The wire transfer. It takes time. International banking regulations, you know. My father signed the papers. You saw him. The logistics company is ours. It is worth 45 million. I will have the cash in 1 hour." The second man chuckled. It was a dry, dusty sound, like boots walking on gravel. "You don't have an hour, Bradley. You have 10 minutes. And we know about the gambling debts in Vegas. We know about the loans you took from the triads in Chinatown to pay the interest on our loan. You are digging a hole so deep you are going to come out in hell." No, that is all covered," Bradley insisted, wiping sweat from his upper lip with a shaking hand. "Once this deal goes through, everyone gets paid. I am going to be the CEO. I am going to be rich. You will see. I will buy you all drinks." The scarred man reached out and straightened Bradley's bow tie. The gesture was intimate and threatening, like a butcher inspecting a cut of meat before the slaughter. "You are not a CEO," the man said softly. "You are a carcass, and the vultures are circling. Look around you, Bradley. Your wife is gone. Your daddy is gone. And your money is imaginary. If that phone doesn't ding in 10 minutes, we aren't taking you out the back door. We are taking you out in pieces." They stepped back, fading into the crowd like sharks returning to the deep water, leaving Bradley standing there, shaking. He looked at his phone again. Still nothing. He looked at the happy guests dancing and laughing. He wanted to scream. He wanted to run. But his legs felt like lead. He was trapped in a cage of his own making, and the lock was turning. He took a gulp of the warm champagne, trying to wash away the taste of bile rising in his throat. He was a king by name, but tonight he was just a pauper with a price on his head, and the bill was coming due. The elevator doors slid open, revealing the concrete underbelly of the hotel. The air here was thick with the smell of exhaust fumes and cold rubber, a stark contrast to the perfume and champagne I had just left behind. The parking garage was a maze of shadows and steel, but I did not need to search. I pulled out my phone, checking the tracking app linked to the digital watch I had given Mia. The blinking red dot was stationary, just 50 feet away in the VIP section. Russo stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. He had ditched the janitor uniform and was now wearing a tactical vest over his black shirt. He nodded once, his face grim and focused. "Black SUV," he whispered, pointing to a massive vehicle parked in the darkest corner. "One hostile inside. Driver seat. He is playing on his phone." We moved. I did not run. I moved with a silent, rolling gait that absorbed the sound of my footsteps. Russo took the driver's side. I took the passenger rear. We arrived at the vehicle simultaneously. Russo tapped on the glass with the muzzle of his suppressed pistol. The guard, a young thug with a neck tattoo, looked up startled. He didn't even have time to reach for his weapon. Russo opened the door and pulled him out in one fluid motion. There was a brief scuffle, the sound of a fist hitting flesh, and then the guard was zip-tied and unconscious on the concrete floor before his phone even hit the ground. I ripped open the back door. Mia was curled up in a ball on the leather seat. Her knee pulled to her chest. Her eyes squeezed shut. She was shaking so hard the seatbelt buckle rattled against the doorframe. "Mia," I said, my voice breaking with the sheer relief that flooded my veins. "It is Grandpa." "Open your eyes, sweet pea." She gasped and looked up. When she saw me standing there in my tuxedo, looking like the grandfather she remembered, and not the broken old man she had been told to fear, she let out a cry that echoed off the concrete walls. She unbuckled the belt and launched herself into my arms. I caught her burying my face in her hair, smelling the strawberry shampoo that reminded me of innocence and home. "I knew you would come," she sobbed, her tears soaking my lapel. "Mommy said you wouldn't, but I knew." I looked at the watch, Grandpa. I watched the dot move. I held her tighter than I had ever held anything. For the last 3 days, this little girl had been the chain around my neck, the weakness my enemies used to choke me. But now the chain was broken. "Russo," I said, looking over her head, "get her to the safe room on the 4th floor. Your partner is there." Russo nodded, holstering his weapon. "I will guard the door myself, Conrad. Nobody gets in. Not the mob, not the police, not her parents." I kissed Mia on the forehead. "Go with Mr. Russo, sweet pea. He is a good friend. Grandpa has one last bit of business to finish upstairs. Then we are going to the farm. Just you and me." She nodded, wiping her eyes, and took Russo's hand. I watched them get into the service elevator. I watched the doors close. I stood alone in the cold garage. The silence settled around me, heavy and dangerous. I adjusted my cuffs. I straightened my tie. A strange sensation washed over me. It was a feeling of absolute, terrifying freedom. As long as they had Mia, I was vulnerable. I had to be careful. I had to negotiate. But now Mia was safe. The leverage was gone. The brake lines were cut. I turned back toward the main elevator. I wasn't going back up there to negotiate. I wasn't going back up there to explain. I was going back up there to destroy them. They had threatened my blood. They had caged my heart. Now they were going to see what happens when you corner a beast and then foolishly open the cage door. I pressed the button for the ballroom floor. The king was coming to claim his throne, and he was bringing the fire with him. The house lights dimmed, plunging the ballroom into a heavy velvet darkness that smelled of anticipation and expensive perfume. A single spotlight cut through the gloom, hitting the center of the stage with a blinding white intensity. The chatter of the crowd died down instantly, replaced by the soft rustle of silk and the clinking of ice in glasses. They were ready for the show. They were ready to see the old lion surrender his pride and hand over the keys to the kingdom. I walked up the 3 wooden steps to the stage. My tuxedo shoes tapped a steady rhythm on the hollow floorboards. I did not need the cane. I left it leaning against the stairs, a silent symbol of the crutch I no longer needed. I stepped into the circle of light. The heat was instant, baking my face, but I did not sweat. I felt cold. I felt precise. I reached out and gripped the microphone stand. The metal was cool under my palm. It felt like the handle of a sword. Suddenly there was a flurry of movement to my left. Monica came running up the stairs. She was out of breath, her chest heaving under her designer gown. She had managed to break out of the coat check room somehow, perhaps bribing a staff member or kicking through the lock. Her hair was slightly askew, a few strands escaping her perfect bun, and her lipstick was smudged, but she was a professional social climber. By the time she stepped into the spotlight, she had plastered a wide, beaming smile onto her face. It was a rictus of terror, a mask made of porcelain that was cracking at the edges. She moved to my side, hooking her arm through mine. To the audience, it looked like a touching display of family unity. To me, it felt like a shackle. She squeezed my arm hard enough to bruise, leaning in close so her cheek brushed mine. "You think you are clever," she hissed through her clenched teeth, her voice too low for the microphone to pick up. "You think locking me in a closet changes anything. We still have Mia. If you say one word off script, Conrad, I swear I will text the guard in the garage and tell him to finish it. Do not test me." I looked down at her. I looked into her eyes and saw the desperation of a drowning woman trying to pull me under with her. She had no idea. She didn't know the garage was empty. She didn't know the guard was unconscious. She didn't know her leverage was sitting in a safe room eating chocolates with a federal agent. She was threatening a man who had already disarmed the bomb. I smiled. It wasn't the confused smile of the dementia patient. It was a genuine smile. "You look lovely tonight, Monica," I said, my voice calm and clear. She blinked, confused by my composure. She expected fear. She expected bargaining. Instead, she found a wall. "Just read the speech," she whispered, her nails digging deeper into my bicep. "Announce the transfer. Save your son. Save your granddaughter." I looked out at the sea of faces in the dark. I saw Bradley standing near the front row, sweating profusely next to Sergey. I saw the greedy eyes of the investors. I saw the false friends who had abandoned me. They were all waiting for the payout. They were all waiting for the victim to bleed. I reached up and adjusted the microphone. A high-pitched squeal of feedback cut through the room, making the audience wince. The sound engineer hurriedly adjusted the levels and silence returned. A heavy, expectant silence. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the stale air of the ballroom. I felt the weight of the disappearing ink pen in my pocket. I felt the ghost of the man they wanted me to be fading away. "Welcome, everyone," I said, my voice booming through the speakers, steady and commanding. "Thank you for joining us on this historic night. Monica relaxed slightly against me, thinking she had won. I felt her muscles unclench. She thought the script was being followed. She didn't know I had rewritten the ending. I paused, letting the tension stretch until it was tight as a piano wire. Then I prepared to cut it. "You all came here tonight to witness a transfer of power," I said, my voice echoing through the silent ballroom. "You came to see the old lion lay down his head and let the scavengers feast. My daughter-in-law Monica stands here beside me, gripping my arm, believing she has secured the future of this family. My son Bradley sits in the front row, believing he has finally stepped out of my shadow." I looked down at Bradley. He was leaning forward in his chair, his eyes locked on the leather folder sitting on the podium. Beside him, Sergei stopped chewing his steak. The Russian sensed a shift in the wind. His hand drifted slowly toward the inside of his jacket. "Bradley," I called out. "Come up here, son. This moment belongs to you." Bradley jumped up. He didn't walk, he scrambled up the stairs, tripping slightly on the last step. He stood next to me, sweating under the hot lights, his hands reaching out greedily for the folder. "Give it to me, Dad," he whispered. "Just give it to me and sit down." I picked up the folder. It was heavy with the weight of the documents inside, the deeds, the titles, the transfer of the logistics empire I had spent 40 years building. "This folder contains the future of Kingston Logistics," I announced to the crowd. "It contains the unconditional surrender of my assets. It contains the signature that my family fought so hard to obtain. They lied for it. They stole for it. They even held a knife to a child's throat for it." A gasp rippled through the audience. Monica went rigid beside me. "Shut up," she hissed. "Give him the papers, you old fool." I opened the folder. I looked at the document. The page was crisp and cream-colored, and it was completely, absolutely blank. The ink I had used, the proprietary spycraft formula, had done its work. In the hour since I signed it in the living room, the chemical compound had reacted with the air and evaporated without a trace. The bold black signature of Conrad Arthur King was gone. There was no residue, no smudge, just empty virgin paper. I turned the folder around so Bradley could see. "Read it, son," I said, my voice cold as the grave. "Read the name of the new owner." Bradley stared at this page. He blinked. He rubbed his eyes. He leaned closer until his nose almost touched the paper. "Dad," he stammered, his voice rising in panic. It is gone. The ink. Where is the ink? I saw you sign it. I saw it." I tossed the folder into the air. The loose pages fluttered down like snow, landing at Bradley's feet. "There is nothing there," I said, leaning into the microphone. "Because you get nothing. You thought you could force a king to abdicate. You thought you could threaten my blood and walk away with my gold. But you forgot one thing, Bradley. I write my own history, and tonight I wrote you out of it." Bradley fell to his knees, frantically gathering the blank pages, holding them up to the light, desperately searching for a ghost of a signature. "It is a trick," he screamed, looking at Sergei. "He tricked us." Sergei stood up. The table overturned with a crash, sending glass and silverware flying. The beast realized he had been hunting a phantom. The ballroom erupted into chaos. But on stage I stood still, a calm center in the middle of the storm I had just unleashed. The ink had vanished, and with it their entire future. I stood center stage, watching the chaos unfold, with the cold detachment of a judge passing a final sentence. Bradley was still on his knees, clawing at the blank pages, while Sergei kicked the table aside, his face twisting into a mask of fury. But I was not done. I tapped the small remote control, concealed in my palm, the one Russo had synced to the hotel projection system. "Ladies and gentlemen," I boomed, my voice cutting through the rising murmur of the crowd. "You have seen the contract. Now I want you to see the motivation. Please direct your attention to the main screen." Behind me, the massive LED wall that had been displaying the Kingston Logistics logo flickered. The image changed. It was no longer crisp, high-definition graphics. It was grainy black and white footage taken from a hidden camera inside a hotel suite. The date stamp in the corner was from 3 days ago. The ballroom fell silent. The sound of amplified giggling filled the cavernous space. On the screen, 2 figures were entangled in a mess of sheets. The camera zoomed in. It was Monica. And she was not with Bradley. She was with Marcus Vance, the family attorney, the man sitting at table 4, the man who was supposed to be the moral compass of my estate. The audio was crystal clear. "He is taking too long to die," Monica's voice said on the screen, her head resting on the lawyer chest. "The old man is stubborn. We need to increase the dose." "Do not worry, baby Marcus," voice replied, a smug arrogance dripping from every syllable. "Once he signs the papers, we can pull the plug. We will make it look like a stroke. Then we take the cash and leave Bradley to deal with the IRS. He is too stupid to notice anyway." A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. I looked down at Monica. She was staring at the screen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. She looked at the crowd, then at Bradley. For the first time, she looked small. I pressed the button again. The image shifted. This time it was Bradley. He was sitting in his office, a bottle of scotch on the desk, talking on the phone. I cooked the books he slurred on the screen. "The profit margins are fake. The inventory is fake. I made up the numbers to get the loans. If Dad finds out, he will kill me. But as long as he is sick, nobody checks the ledger." I paused the video, leaving Bradley confessed face frozen on the giant screen 10 feet tall. The silence in the room was absolute, but it was a heavy, dangerous silence. I looked at Marcus Vance. The lawyer was sitting frozen in his chair, his face the color of ash. Beside him, his wife, a dignified woman who sat on the board of 3 charities, stood up slowly. She was trembling, but not with fear. She turned to her husband. The sound of her hand connecting with his face was louder than the gunshot. It was a sharp, violent crack that echoed off the walls. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just spat on him, turned on her heel, and walked out of the ballroom. Her head held high. I looked back at my family. Bradley was staring at the screen, seeing his own betrayal broadcast to the world. Monica was backing away, shaking her head, as the social elite, the people she had tried so hard to impress, looked at her with pure, unadulterated disgust. "You wanted the spotlight," I said, speaking into the microphone, my voice low and hard. "You wanted to be the center of attention. Well, now you are. This is who you are. Liars, adulterers, thieves, and now everyone knows it." The illusion was shattered. The curtains were torn down. I had stripped them naked in front of the very people they worshipped. And as the shock began to turn into outrage, I knew the police were already moving in. But before the law took them, I wanted to make sure they had nothing left to lose. I stood there, gripping the microphone, watching the hope drain out of my son's eyes, only to be replaced by a sudden, desperate flicker of greed. Even after the video, even after the public humiliation, Bradley was still an addict looking for a fix. He looked at the blank pages in his hands, then up at me, his face streaked with sweat and tears. "You want it?" I asked, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "You want the legacy, Bradley? You want to be the king?" "Yes," he choked out, scrambling to his feet. "It is my birthright, Dad. I earned it. I kept the company afloat while you were sick." I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound that chilled the room. "Very well," I said. "I am a man of my word. Even if that word was written in disappearing ink, the intent remains. If you want Kingston Logistics, Bradley, it is yours. I publicly relinquish all control. I step down effective immediately. You are the CEO. You are the owner. You are the captain of the ship." Bradley's eyes widened. He looked at Monica, who had stopped retreating. He looked at Sergei, who had paused in the middle of his rampage. For a second, they thought I had broken. They thought the pressure had finally cracked the old man, and I was giving them the keys to the vault just to make the pain stop. "Thank you," Bradley sobbed, a pathetic smile breaking through the grime on his face. "Thank you, Dad. I knew you would understand. I will take care of it, I promise." He turned to the crowd, arms raised, ready to accept their applause. But nobody clapped. They were watching me. They saw the wolfish grin spreading across my face. "There is just one small detail," I said, cutting off his moment of triumph. "One little piece of housekeeping you might have missed while you were busy holding a knife to your daughter's throat." I pulled a folded piece of paper from my tuxedo pocket. It was not blank. It was a certified legal document stamped with the official seal of the federal court. At 8:00 this morning, my attorneys filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, I announced, my voice ringing out like a judgment bell. "The paperwork was processed an hour ago. Kingston Logistics is insolvent. The assets are frozen. The accounts are empty. The company you just inherited is not a gold mine, Bradley. It is a corpse." Bradley dropped his arms. His mouth fell open. What he whispered, "No, that is impossible. The warehouse, the trucks, leased," I said mercilessly. "All leased, and the lease payments are 3 months behind. But that is not the best part." I leaned over the podium, looking directly into his soul. "Since you are now the CEO, and since you just admitted on video to cooking the books, the $10 million tax liability that the IRS discovered this morning is now your personal problem. You didn't inherit a fortune, son. You inherited a federal investigation and a mountain of debt. You are not a billionaire. You are the owner of a sinking ship. And I just put you at the helm in the middle of a hurricane." The silence that followed was absolute. Bradley looked at his hands as if they were covered in poison. He looked at Sergei. The Russian mobster wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking at Bradley. He was looking at the man who had promised him millions and delivered a bankrupt shell. And in Sergei's eyes, I saw a verdict that was far worse than anything the IRS could deliver. Bradley had wanted the crown so badly. Now he was going to be crushed by the weight of it. The silence in the ballroom was not empty. It was heavy with the wreckage of their dreams. Bradley stood amidst the scattered papers of a bankrupt company, looking like a man who had just realized his parachute was made of lead. But Monica was not done. She was a survivor, a creature of pure greed who could smell a dollar bill from a mile away. She stepped over the debris of her husband's dignity, her eyes locking onto me with a laser focus. "What about your personal accounts?" she screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "The company might be dead, but you are still rich, Conrad. You have millions in the Cayman Islands. You have stocks. You have bonds. That money belongs to the family." I looked at her, and for a moment I almost admired her persistence. She was standing on the deck of the Titanic, demanding to know where the jewelry was kept. I reached into the inner pocket of my tuxedo. I did not pull out a weapon. I pulled out a single rectangular piece of paper. It was a cashier check, oversized and printed on heavy cardstock, the kind used for charitable donations. I held it up. The stage lights caught the gold foil of the bank logo, making it shine like a beacon in the gloom. "You are right, Monica," I said, my voice calm and conversational. "I did have personal assets. A lot of them. But you see, I had a feeling that vultures were circling. So last week, before I even came to the villa, before you drugged me and threw me in a basement, I made a phone call. I took a step closer to the edge of the stage, letting them see the numbers printed on the check. I liquidated everything I announced. Every stock. Every bond. Every piece of real estate that wasn't attached to the bankruptcy. I sold it all. $45 million in cash." Monica's eyes widened. She licked her lips. She took a step forward, her hand reaching out involuntarily. "Give it to us," she begged. "We can fix this." We can pay the taxes. We can pay Sergei. Just give it to me, Conrad. I shook my head slowly. I am afraid that is impossible, I said. You see, this check is not made out to me, and it is certainly not made out to you. I flipped the check around. The name printed on the payee line was large and bold. The Mia King Irrevocable Trust. The crowd murmured. I saw Russo standing by the exit nod his head. He had helped me set it up. This money has already been deposited. I continued, my voice hardening into steel. It is locked in a blind trust for the sole benefit of my granddaughter, Mia King. It is managed by a board of independent trustees. It pays for her education, her health, her future. And there is a very specific clause in the trust deed, Monica. I paused, letting the words hang in the air like a guillotine blade. Not one single penny can be accessed by her parents or legal guardians. If you try to touch it, if you try to borrow against it, the entire fund freezes and alerts the authorities. You cannot steal it. You cannot leverage it. You cannot even see it. The realization hit Monica like a physical blow. The money was there just inches away, but it was behind a wall of glass she could never break. The frustration was too much for her to handle. Her veneer of sophistication shattered completely. No, she shrieked, a feral animal sound tearing from her throat. It is mine. I earned it. I put up with you. I put up with this idiot husband. It is mine. She lunged. She scrambled up the stairs, her heels clicking frantically on the wood. She reached for the check, her fingers hooked like claws, her face twisted into a mask of pure avarice. She didn't care about the cameras. She didn't care about the police. She just wanted the paper. She never reached me. A wall of black fabric stepped in her path. It was the head of hotel security, a man who had worked for me for 20 years. He didn't strike her. He simply stood there, immovable as a mountain. Monica slammed into his chest and bounced back, stumbling in her expensive gown. She flailed, trying to get around him, clawing at his jacket, screaming obscenities that made the high society guests cover their ears. It is over, Monica, I said quietly, lowering the check. You chased the gold so hard you ran right off the cliff, and the only thing you caught was the wind. The applause I had denied Bradley was replaced by a sound far more satisfying. The wail of sirens cut through the winter night, penetrating the thick walls of the Grand Hotel. Blue and red strobe lights washed through the high arched windows, painting the terrified faces of the guests in the colors of the law. The heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom burst open, and this time it was not a waiter or a guest who entered. It was Detective Whitman, flanked by 6 uniformed officers. He moved down the center aisle with the grim determination of a man who had seen too much evil and was finally getting the chance to clean some of it up. The crowd parted for him instantly, stepping back to avoid the contagion of guilt that now radiated from the stage. Monica saw them coming. For a split second, her delusion returned. She smoothed her disheveled hair and plastered a look of righteous indignation on her face. She stepped forward to meet the detective, treating him like a servant she had summoned to take out the trash. "Officer," she said, her voice shrill but trying for authoritative. "Thank God you are here. My father-in-law has lost his mind. He is causing a scene. He has stolen my daughter. I want him arrested immediately." Whitman stopped 3 feet from her. He looked at her with eyes that were cold and hard as flint. He didn't speak to her. He spoke to the officer beside him. "Cuff her," he said flatly. "What?" Honikika gasped, stepping back. "You cannot touch me." "Do you know who I am?" "I know exactly who you are," Monica King Whitman said, pulling a folded warrant from his pocket. "You are the woman who appears in a video slapping a 6-year-old child across the face. You are the woman who locked a senior citizen in a freezing basement. And according to the lab report I just received from the sample Mr. Russo recovered from your kitchen, you are the woman who put enough arsenic and sedatives in a cup of tea to kill a horse." Monica's face went white. She looked at the warrant, then at me. I stood on the stage looking down at her, my expression unreadable. I held up the empty glass of champagne I had been holding, a silent toast to her demise. "That is a lie," she screamed, her hands curling into claws. "He planted it. He is the crazy one. He is senile." Whitman nodded to his men. 2 officers grabbed Monica's arms. She fought them. She didn't go with dignity. She kicked and thrashed, her designer heels scraping against the polished floor. The handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists, the metallic sound echoing through the silent room like a gavel strike. "You old bastard!" she shrieked, spitting in my direction as they began to drag her away. "I hope you rot. I hope you die alone in that big house. You think you won. You are nothing. You are a monster." I stepped to the edge of the stage. The microphone picked up my whisper, amplifying it so every person in the room could hear the final nail being driven into her coffin. "I may be a monster, Monica," I said calmly, "but I am a monster who protects his own. You broke the cardinal rule. You hurt the child. Enjoy prison. I hear the food is terrible." She screamed a long, formless sound of pure rage as they hauled her through the double doors. The crowd watched in stunned silence. The socialite queen had fallen, and she had been dragged out, not in a carriage, but in chains, leaving behind nothing but the stain of her own venom. Detective Whitman turned his attention to the man kneeling amidst the scattered blank pages of his ruined future. Bradley looked up at the approaching officers, not with fear, but with a pathetic sort of gratitude. In his mind, a prison cell was a sanctuary, a concrete box with steel bars that would keep the wolves at bay. He held out his wrists, almost eager for the cold embrace of the handcuffs. But before Whitman could snap the metal cuffs onto my son's wrists, a heavy hand slammed down on the podium. The sound was like a gunshot. The room froze. Sergei Petrov had stepped forward, his massive frame blocking the path of the police. His 2 lieutenants stepped out from the shadows, forming a human wall between Bradley and the exit. "There is a matter of business that takes precedence over the law." Sergei rumbled, his voice deep and vibrating with suppressed violence. He ignored the police guns drawn and pointed at his chest. He looked only at me. "He owes me $5 million, Sergei said, pointing a thick finger at Bradley, who was now trembling so violently his teeth chattered. "Plus interest. The deal was cash on delivery. The papers are blank. The company is bankrupt. But the debt remains. Who pays Conrad?" Bradley scrambled on his knees, turning toward me. His eyes were wide and wet, desperate pleading pools. "Dad," he screamed. "Pay him. You have the money. I know you have it. You said you sold the stocks. Break the trust. Write him a check. Please, Dad. If you do not pay him, he will kill me." I looked at my son. I looked at the man I had raised, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the teenager I had bailed out of trouble, time and time again. For 40 years, I had been his safety net. I had been the wall that stood between him and the consequences of his own stupidity. But walls crumble eventually. I looked at Sergei. I did not blink. "I do not owe you anything," I said, my voice calm and final. "I did not sign a loan with you. I did not gamble with your money. I did not invite you into my home." "But he is your son," Sergei spat. I looked down at Bradley. He looked small, weak, a child who had played with fire and was now shocked that he was getting burned. "He is not a child," I said, coldness seeping into every word. "He is a grown man. He wanted to be the CEO. He wanted to be the boss. Well, being the boss means paying your own bills." "Dad, please," Bradley sobbed, clutching at my pant leg. I stepped back, pulling my leg away from his grasp, as if he were something unclean. "This is a private business matter between you and your partner's son," I said. "I am retired. I do not interfere in the dealings of the Kingston Logistics CEO. You made the deal. You settle it." I nodded to Detective Whitman. "Officer, you may proceed." Whitman stepped forward, shoving Sergei aside. The Russian mobster did not fight the police. He knew better. He stepped back, a cruel smile playing on his lips. He looked at Bradley and drew a thumb across his throat. "We will see you soon," Bradley Sergei whispered. "Prison has a waiting list, and my friends are very patient." Whitman hauled Bradley to his feet. My son screamed as Sergei straightened his jacket, adjusting his cufflinks, as if he were simply leaving a boring dinner party. He looked at me with the nod of respect, the predator acknowledging the survivor. He thought he was walking out the front door to wait for my son in the shadows of the prison yard. He thought he was untouchable because he had intimidation on his side. But I had Russo. Russo stepped out from the side of the stage. He was no longer the janitor with the mop or the driver with the cap. He reached into his tactical vest and pulled out a gold badge that caught the harsh glare of the emergency lights. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Russo announced, his voice cutting through the noise like a siren. "Sergei Petrov, you are under arrest for racketeering, extortion, and the possession of illegal firearms." Sergei froze. The arrogance drained from his face, replaced by the cold, hard realization of a trap snapped shut. He looked around. The local police stepped back, and a dozen agents in windbreakers swarmed from the kitchen exits. They moved with a precision that made the hotel security look like amateurs. They didn't ask Sergei to put his hands up. They threw him against the wall. They pulled a concealed pistol from his waistband and a switchblade from his boot. "You set me up," Sergei roared as they shoved his face against the plaster. "You old wolf! You set me up!" I watched them drag him out. He wasn't a terrifying mob boss anymore. He was just another criminal in handcuffs destined for a federal supermax, where his threats would bounce harmlessly off the concrete walls. Then I turned to the window. Outside, the flashing lights painted the night in chaotic strokes of red and blue. I could see the driveway. They were leading Bradley to a patrol car. He wasn't fighting. He wasn't screaming. He was stumbling his legs, barely able to support the weight of his own failure. He looked like a child who had lost his mother in a crowd. He stopped just before they pushed him into the back seat. He looked up at the hotel. He looked up at the balcony where I stood. Our eyes met through the glass. He was crying silent, broken tears that streamed down his face, ruining the expensive tuxedo I had bought him. He mouthed the word, "Dad." I placed my hand against the cold glass. I didn't wave. I didn't turn away. I just watched. I watched the officer put his hand on my son's head to protect it as he guided him into the car. I watched the door slam shut. It was the sound of a book closing, the sound of a legacy ending. The King Mansion. My pride and joy, the house I had built with my own hands, would be silent tonight. The police were already there, stringing yellow tape across the wrought iron gates. They were sealing the doors. They were cataloging the evidence. The servants would be sent home. The lights would be turned off. It was no longer a home. It was a monument to greed, a crime scene where a family had cannibalized itself. I turned back to the empty ballroom. The guests had been ushered out. The floor was littered with the debris of the party. Broken glass, spilled wine, and the blank pages of a contract that never existed. I stood in the center of the ruin. I had destroyed the company. I had imprisoned my daughter-in-law. I had sent my son to jail. I had burned everything to the ground. And as I took a deep breath of the silence, I realized something profound. I had never felt lighter. The rot was gone. The parasites were gone. The empire had fallen, but the king was still standing. And most importantly, the little princess was safe. The destruction was absolute, but it was also the only way to build something new. Dragged him away, not because of the handcuffs, but because he knew the truth. I had saved his life from the immediate blade, but I had left him in a cage with the lions. He was going to prison with a $5 million bounty on his head. I watched him go, and I felt nothing but a hollow, echoing silence. The branch was cut. The tree would survive. The lobby of the Grand Hotel was silent. The kind of silence that falls after a violent storm has stripped the leaves from the trees. The police had cleared the room, the guests had fled into the night, and the staff were busy sweeping up the shards of a broken dynasty. I walked across the marble floor for the last time. My tuxedo was rumpled, my bow tie hung loose around my neck, but I walked with a lightness I had not felt in 40 years. I held Mia hand. She held on to me tight, her small fingers wrapped around my thumb, as if I were the only solid thing in a world that had turned to liquid. She didn't look back at the ballroom. She didn't ask about her mother or her father. She just looked at her feet, marching in step with mine, trusting me to lead her out of the maze. We reached the revolving doors. Russo was standing there, leaning against a brass pillar. He had removed his tactical vest and was back in his plain clothes. He looked tired. He looked satisfied. "You good, Conrad?" he asked, his voice low. "I am good, Russo," I said. "Better than good. I am free." He nodded, understanding the weight of the word. He tossed me a set of keys. Not the keys to a limousine. Not the keys to a luxury sedan. They were heavy rusted iron keys attached to a faded plastic fob. "I had the boys bring it around," Russo said. "Thought you might want a familiar ride." I took the keys. "Thank you, Russo, for everything." I pushed through the glass doors into the biting cold of the winter night. The air tasted clean, sharp, and indifferent to the drama that had just unfolded. The driveway was empty of patrol cars now. The flashing lights had faded into the distance, taking my son and his wife to their new reality. And there it was, parked right in front of the grand entrance amidst the lingering ghosts of Ferraris and Rolls-Royces, sat my old Ford pickup truck. It was a 1970 model faded blue with a dent in the rear bumper and a cabin that smelled of old leather and pine. It was the truck I had bought when I started the company. It was the truck I drove when I was just a man with grease under his fingernails and a dream in his pocket. The valet looked at it with disdain, holding the door open with 2 fingers. I chuckled. To him it was a piece of junk. To me it was a chariot. I lifted Mia up and placed her on the bench seat. She looked around at the worn dashboard. The manual window cranks the AM radio. "It is not fancy, Grandpa," she whispered, touching the cracked vinyl. "No, sweet pea," I said, climbing in beside her and pulling the heavy door shut with a solid clunk. "It is not fancy. But it is real. And it is ours." I sat there for a moment, my hands gripping the thin steering wheel. I looked out at the hotel, the massive stone monument to my ego. I realized I had no home to go back to. The mansion was a crime scene. The penthouse was seized. The company was gone. I had walked into this building a billionaire, and I was driving out with nothing but the clothes on my back and a tank of gas. And yet, as I looked at the little girl buckling her seatbelt beside me, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over my soul. The ledger was balanced. The noise was gone. The constant crushing pressure to be the king, to feed the machine, to protect the fortune, it had all vanished. I turned the key. The engine coughed once, then roared to life with a deep, throaty rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. It was the heartbeat of a survivor. "Where are we going?" Grandpa Mia asked, looking up at me with wide, trusting eyes. I put the truck in gear. I looked at the road ahead, stretching out into the darkness, winding away from the city, away from the lies, and toward the quiet of the country. "We are going to the farm, sweet pea," I said, smiling. "We are going to watch the sun come up. And then we are going to start living." I hit the gas. The old truck lurched forward, leaving the Grand Hotel in the rearview mirror, shrinking smaller and smaller, until it was just a speck of light in the darkness. I didn't look back again. The king was dead. Long live the grandfather. The Texas sun is a different beast than the gray skies of Seattle. It does not ask for permission. It beats down on the dry earth with a heavy, relentless heat that seeps into your bones and chases away the cold of the past. I sat on the porch of the small farmhouse wiping grease from my hands with an old rag. The house was not much to look at. The paint was peeling in spots and the roof needed patching, but it stood on solid ground. There were no hidden cameras here, no secret microphones, just the sound of crickets and the wind rustling through the pecan trees. It has been 6 months since the night at the Grand Hotel. 6 months since the empire of Kingston Logistics crumbled into dust. The business news cycles have moved on. They stopped talking about the scandal weeks ago. The world forgets quickly. But I do not forget. I heard the rumble of the yellow school bus coming down the dirt road. It squealed to a halt at the end of the driveway, kicking up a cloud of red dust. The doors opened, and a little girl jumped out. She was not the pale, terrified ghost who had been locked in an attic. She was brown from the sun. Her hair was tangled from the wind. She wore denim overalls and boots that were covered in mud. Mia ran toward me, waving a piece of paper. "Grandpa, look," she shouted. "I got a star." I watched her run. She didn't check over her shoulder. She didn't flinch at loud noises. She was just a child living a childhood that had almost been stolen from her. The $45 million was sitting in a blind trust in Zurich, untouched and secret. We didn't live on that. We lived on my Navy pension and the small savings I had tucked away in a credit union years ago. We bought this place cash. We grew our own vegetables. We fixed our own fences. We were not rich by the standards of Forbes magazine, but looking at her smile, I knew we were the wealthiest people on earth. I walked inside to get us some lemonade. The letter from the state prosecutor was still sitting on the kitchen table. I had read it 3 times this morning. The trial was swift. The evidence was overwhelming. The video of Monica slapping Mia, combined with the toxicology report of the poison in my tea, left the jury with no doubt. Monica screamed as the gavel came down. She got 15 years in a federal penitentiary. 15 years to think about the difference between greed and ambition. Bradley fared worse. The forensic accountants tore through the company records like termites. They found the tax evasion. They found the money laundering for the Russian mob. They found the fraud. The judge called him a danger to society and a disgrace to his privilege. 20 years. My son would be an old man before he saw the outside world again. I folded the letter and put it in the drawer. I did not feel joy. A father does not celebrate the destruction of his son, no matter how necessary it was. I felt a heavy, somber closure. The infection had been cut out. The wound would leave a scar, but the patient would survive. I went back out to the porch. Mia was chasing a stray cat near the barn, laughing as it darted under the tractor. I took a sip of the cold lemonade. I looked at my hands. They were rough again, calloused from work. I wasn't the CEO anymore. I wasn't the chairman. I was just Conrad. I leaned back in the rocking chair, watching the sun begin to dip below the horizon, painting the Texas sky in shades of purple and gold. I had lost a company. I had lost a fortune. I had lost a son. But as Mia turned and waved at me, her eyes bright and full of love, I knew I had won the only war that mattered. The king had retired, but the grandfather was just getting started. The envelope was gray and felt thin between my fingers, like it held nothing of substance inside. The return address was stamped in red ink. Department of Corrections. It was the first letter Bradley had sent in 6 months, and it sat heavy in my hand as I walked back from the mailbox at the end of the long dirt driveway. The Texas wind whipped around me, kicking up dust, but I did not feel the grit. I only felt the ghost of my son trying to reach out from behind bars. I sat on the porch steps and looked at the letter. I did not need to open it to know what was written inside. I knew the script by heart. I had heard it 1,000 times before. First would come the apology, the tearful words about how he had made a mistake, how he had been led astray. Then would come the excuses, the blaming of Monica, the blaming of the pressure, and finally, the hook. The request. Please, Dad, I need money for the commissary. The food is terrible. I need to buy things to stay safe. Just a few $100s. I promise I will pay you back. It was the song of an addict. An addict addicted to the easy way out. An addict who still believed that there was a safety net waiting to catch him if he just cried loud enough. I pulled a box of wooden matches from my pocket. I struck one against the rough sole of my boot. The flame flared up bright and orange against the twilight. I held the corner of the envelope to the fire. I watched the paper curl and blacken. I watched the red stamp of the prison disappear into smoke. I watched my son's name turn to ash. I did not open it. I did not read a single word. To read it would be to let him back in. To read it would be to give him hope that the bank of Dad was still open. And hope gives a man false comfort when what he really needs is to face the cold, hard truth of his actions. Grandpa. I looked up. Mia was standing in the doorway holding the screen door open. She was watching the last of the paper crumble into dust in the dirt. Her eyes were big and serious. She knew who the letter was from. She was young, but she had grown up fast in the last year. Was that from Daddy? She asked, her voice quiet. Yes, sweet pea, I said, brushing the ash from my hands. It was. Did he say he was sorry? She asked, taking a step onto the porch. I looked at her. I looked at the innocence that had almost been destroyed by the man who wrote that letter. I thought about the lie. I thought about the knife. I thought about the betrayal. I am sure he is, I said gently. Everyone is sorry when they are in a cage, Mia. She sat down beside me, leaning her head against my arm. Do you forgive him, Grandpa? The priest at church said we have to forgive everyone. I put my arm around her, pulling her close, smelling the sunshine in her hair. I looked out at the fields stretching to the horizon. I loved my son. Part of me would always love him. But love does not mean being a victim. Love does not mean handing a loaded gun to someone who has already shot you. Forgiveness is a tricky thing, sweet pea, I said softly. It is a heavy thing. And to be honest, that is above my pay grade. Forgiving him is God's business. That is between Bradley and the man upstairs. Then what is your business? She asked, looking up at me. I kissed the top of her head. My business is right here. My business is to make sure the gate stays locked. My business is to protect you from the wolves, even the ones who share our blood. I stood up and brushed the dust from my jeans. The letter was gone. The ashes were scattering in the wind. The connection was severed. Come on, I said, holding out my hand. Let us go inside. It is time for dinner. And tomorrow we have fences to mend. We went inside and locked the door, leaving the darkness outside where it belonged. The old Ford pickup bounced over the ruts of the back pasture, kicking up clouds of dry Texas dust that glittered like gold dust in the afternoon sun. Inside the cabin, the air smelled of stale coffee and gasoline, a scent that used to remind me of work, but now reminds me of freedom. Mia sat on the edge of the bench seat, her legs stretching to reach the pedals I had rigged with wooden blocks. Her hands, small and brown from a summer in the sun, gripped the oversized steering wheel with a ferocity that made me smile. Easy on the clutch, sweet pea, I said, resting my hand gently over hers. Feel the engine. Listen to it. It will tell you when it is ready. Do not force it. You have to work with it. The truck bucked once, then smoothed out, rolling forward through the tall grass. Mia let out a whoop of pure, unadulterated joy that scattered the crows from the fence line. Look, Grandpa, she screamed. I am driving. I am really driving. I leaned back against the cracked vinyl seat and watched her. I watched the way the sunlight caught the stray hairs escaping her ponytail. I watched the focus in her eyes, the same focus I used to have before the boardrooms and the bottom lines dulled my vision. For 40 years, I chased the wrong things. I chased the numbers. I chased the legacy. I thought I was building a kingdom for my family, but I was just building a gilded cage for monsters. People always told me that blood is thicker than water. They say family is everything. They say you stick by your own no matter what. But they are wrong. Sitting here in this dusty truck, I realized the hard truth that nobody puts in the greeting cards. Sometimes blood turns toxic. Sometimes the rot sets in so deep that it threatens to kill the whole body. And when that happens, you do not put a bandage on it. You do not pray it gets better. You cut it off. You sever the limb to save the life. It is a painful surgery. It leaves a scar that aches when the rain comes, but it keeps you alive. I looked out at the horizon, where the blue sky met the brown earth. I had traded a logistics empire worth billions for a patch of dirt and a rusted truck. I had traded my reputation in the city for anonymity in the country. I had traded a son for a granddaughter. To the world, I was a tragic figure, a tycoon who lost his mind and his fortune. But they did not know the math. They did not understand the valuation. I spent a lifetime making deals. I bought companies. I sold futures. I leveraged assets. But this right here, listening to a little girl laugh while she learns to drive a stick shift, this was the most expensive purchase I ever made. It cost me everything I owned. It cost me my name. It cost me my home. And as I looked at Mia turning the wheel, her face glowing with a happiness that no money could buy, I knew the truth. I paid a king's ransom for this piece, and it was the best investment of my life. "Keep your eyes on the road, sweet pea," I whispered, closing my eyes and letting the warm wind hit my face. "Just keep driving. We have got a long way to go, and we are in no rush to get there." The truck rolled on, disappearing into the golden light of the setting sun, leaving nothing behind but a cloud of dust and the sound of laughter fading into the silence. We often measure success by the size of our bank accounts and the height of our skyscrapers. But Conrad King's journey reminds us that true legacy isn't written on a balance sheet. It is written in the moments of peace we carve out for those we protect. Real power is the ability to walk away from a toxic table, even if it means leaving a feast behind. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is restart with nothing but your dignity, because the most expensive thing you will ever own is your peace of mind. If you believe that true family is defined by love, and not just blood, like and subscribe to our channel for more stories about justice and redemption.